pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Fasting.
Here.
Bush.
Here.
Dolphin.
Here.
Gunma. Here. Hay. Steffes.
Here.
Stevenson. Here.
Superintendent's report.
Start off with some of the good news happening around the district. On last week, Tuesday, was the 100th day of school, so Zippy Zero visited the kindergarten group and celebrated counting to 100 together. And here are our group of 100s making hats, and they had pancakes, and it was a great celebration. So we officially got a group of kids that can count to 100. In the Ice Lantern Festival, this was the high school. It was the first ever event that we've organized. It was kind of done by the arts community here in Mineral Point, but we had lanterns that lined the downtown streets on those freshly fallen snowfalls, which was really kind of a neat thing. And the proceeds for making these lanterns went back to the art department, so it was a great community partnership. And each of the elementary classrooms received a globe, and that was a sponsored gift by Lowry White. So I want to thank Lowry for supporting our school and our elementary kids that way. In the 4th grade, we had an opportunity to look at Native American homes for those that were in the 3rd grade. So these are 4th graders that were then displaying their showcase of what Indigenous homes look like for our 3rd grade friends that came in and toured that facility in all of their little homes. So a neat way for not only us to learn about Native American Indians, but also then to do some collaboration between grade levels. We had Valentines that were created for Haitian orphans. So these are our kindergartners that made greetings. They were delivered to orphans by community members on their annual visit to Haiti. In the elementary school, Spelling Bee, we had some champions. First place, Spencer Spady. Second place, Bryn Swenson. That's the junior B. The elementary B, first place was Olivia Wilson, and second place was Jaden Swinehart. And in the middle B, first was Allison Chitwood, and second was Derek Hottenstein. So kind of a neat opportunity for our kids to show their talents in spelling. Report card recognition event was held at Tequila Point. I'd like to personally thank Pam Rozecki for putting together a nice opportunity for our staff to come into their facility, and we had tacos and just an opportunity to have some camaraderie around a wonderful report card score. And Pam was just so excited to be able to host something nice for the staff that has done so much for the school community. So thank you, Pam. Our Martin Luther King Day program was again hosted by our 5th grade class, and that was another great event for our elementary building to recognize Martin Luther King and his efforts. And we had Tri-State Honors Band. Owen Stevenson was represented here in this particular picture. It was held at UW-Platteville. There was a conductor, Andrew Boyson. Andrew was a student at Mineral Point High School, and he was actually an alum under John Painter.
I don't think he was a student here. He went to Northwestern.
He went to Northwestern?
Yeah.
Okay. So alum John Painter and Dick Bruno, both were college music professors. Uw-Milwaukee Vocal Festival. Michaela Asherman and Hakan Schrafer were represented there at UW-Milwaukee, so another representation again across the state. And the Swall Honors Choir that was held at Iowa Grant took place. The NBA State Honors Band, that was at UW-Eau Claire. Callie Pierce, Emily Graber, Brady Paulskill, Cody Pierce, and Abby Shannon. So we were well represented in the music area with the Driftless Choir Festival as well. That was in Platteville. And that was Daniel Nordstrom, Evelyn Hendrick, Sierra Evans, Kayla Asherman, Sage, is it Shemek?
Mm-hmm.
Shemek, thank you, and Hakan Schrieffer again. So well represented across the area. Just featured in the Dodgeville Chronicle was a story, a middle school wrestling story. AJ Rury was featured, and I hope to see that in our Democrat Tribune soon. It's a really well-written article, and it's a testament to his perseverance and our coach's care and compassion for our student athletes. So I hope you get a chance to see that story soon. We did have a Wrestling Hall of Fame night this past month, and 2 Mikes were inducted into the Wrestling Hall of Fame, Mike Yeager and Mike Schmitz, so congratulations to both. And just learned recently today that Eric Heisner will play in the Wisconsin Football Coaches Association Senior All-Star Game. That's July 21st, and that's at Uw-Oshkosh Stadium. So congratulations, Eric, for representing Mineral Point at the state level. We did a webinar presentation in conjunction with the Wisconsin Association of School Boards conference and workshop that was attended by Joelle Doy and Kelly Gunlock and myself. Joelle and I made that presentation jointly. This is actually the national, that was the WASB that's coming up later. So we did two presentations. This is the National School Public Relations Association, and that went across obviously the country. So we were featured as doing some great work around communications, and we had an opportunity to present and receive questions from colleagues across the country. The State Education Convention, that's where we did our presentation. That was with our friends from Howard Suwamico. Their Superintendent Communications Director did a joint presentation. It was entitled Building a Solid School Communications Presence from the Ground Up. So we were able to showcase kind of a smaller school perspective compared to a larger school perspective, and some of our similarities and differences in how we approach communications. And our school board candidate forum is coming up as we look ahead, so please mark your calendars for the date of Tuesday, March 6th, 7 p.m. It'll be in the library again. We have 4 candidates running for 3 positions, and this will get an opportunity for the community to meet them firsthand and ask some questions. So we will again videotape that session and look forward to a great turnout again. It's always been a popular event. And just a quick look ahead at my calendar in the month of February. We start this Friday with a staff bowling event, so I'm excited because I'm the returning champion there, but I have a fear that there's a lot of people that are coming for me. We still stay involved with the CISAs, the Area Superintendents meeting in Fenimore, a great opportunity for us to network. A legal conference where I'll be presenting Wisconsin Dells on risk management, specifically around athletic facilities. And a WI Board of Control meeting. We continue to work through some issues around rural and urban discussions on how we place divisions in basketball, as well as some other key topics, but that's pretty pertinent to our community. And again, the school board candidate coming up with hopefully some representation at the state tournament by some of our teams. And that's everything.
Approval of minutes. Do we have a motion to approve? I'll make a motion. Motion by Jeff, do we have a second? I'll second by Kelly. Any discussion?
There were no minutes from the policy meeting. Are there minutes from that policy meeting?
I did not take any, other than just holding up the board book with our work that we did.
Okay.
There wasn't any action, correct?
No, there was no action, so we don't need
So I
minutes.
would just simply put no action and
Okay. That's fine.
Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Communications, board communications received. Anybody? Citizen communications. Gary? You're up.
Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
Good evening, my name is Gary Sullivan. I'm the parents of Kylie Sullivan, Lucas Sullivan, and Allie Sullivan. I want to inform the school board of a situation that took place on April 27, 2016. A 15-year-old female student placed her hands around my 5th grade son's throat on the school bus and threatened to kill him. Yes, I said kill him. My wife informed his teacher and Mr. Wainwright. I only informed Mr. Francois at the time because I always cut out the middleman and I go straight to the top. He told me on the phone at the time he would handle it, and if I was not satisfied to let him know. I knew at the time nothing was done, but what more could I do as a parent? Now we fast forward to December 18th, 2017, when more harassing took place to my son again. Once again, I called Mr. Francois solely and left him a message. The next morning, Mr. Wainwright called me. And I detailed both situations and expressed how disappointed I was that Mr. Francois could not call me, and he had someone else do it for him. 2 hours later, Mr. Francois did call me. We had a lengthy conversation, to which he absolutely recalled the situation on April 27, 2016. But he also completely told me in detail about every other physical altercation this student has been involved with in this school district. And I will not mention any of them here, as I'm only here to address my children only. He told me on the phone that he never informed the school board at that time of this situation because it was not a big enough offense to involve the school board. When I asked him what the plan was going forward with the student, he plainly told me that the school district is looking for the best plan both financially and for the safety of the children. Which I told him I will have an attorney look into this matter because you cannot put money ahead of children and faculty safety. On January 4th, a letter from my attorney was sent to Mr. Francois detailing the exact situation I just spoke to you of. On January 9th, Mr. Francois responded with a letter stating he was unaware of any such incident. And I'm going to read you some excerpts of his letter. It said, I personally talked with Director of Transportation for Contracted Services through First Student Todd Schmitz, High School Principal Mitch Wainwright, Director of Education, Special Education Dixie Dempsey. None possesses any written records or documentation of the incident, nor recalls speaking to Mr. Sullivan on this matter. Thus, the school district has no record of any knowledge or such complaint. And on the bottom, after a bunch of legal stuff, it says, a threat to kill would need to qualify as a threat of abuse, and we would have to have reason to believe that the abuse will occur in order to require a report. We, as a school district, had no knowledge of such threat, and therefore no reason to believe the abuse would occur. And it's signed by Mr. Francois, Mr. Wainwright, Dixie Dempsey, and Larry Steffes. I'd like to read you an email I received back, or my wife received back from Mrs. Bennett, dated April 28, 2016, the day after the incident happened. Thank you for taking the time to send this to me. Very appreciated. I was quite concerned about the incident, and we both went to Mr. Brogley about it, and he has written a report, which the bus barn will look into. Thank you for being such great parents. I also reached out to Mrs. Bennett last week, and I asked her if she would detail the situation a little further, just so nobody could say that I'm making this up. This is what she responded with. I decided to look into Lucas's file to see if there was an incident report, and was surprised that nothing was there. Mr. Brogley stated that he had written a report for the bus barn on it. I contacted the bus barn. They did not have any report in file at this time. In recalling the incident, Lucas came to school very upset. He had been crying and seemed very nervous. I can't recall exact details, but an incident that happened on the bus with another older individual choking Lucas and threatening to kill him. Lucas was hesitant in sharing because of the threat. I'm so sorry to hear that your problems are continuing. I have a letter here from Mr. Wainwright, dated February 6, 2018. I will start with an apology, as I'm willing to guess no one from the school has ever done that. As the letter from the attorney was addressed to Luke, I wrongfully assumed he would be responding to you. For that, I'm sorry. When this was brought to my attention by Mr. Francois, I had vague memory of the incident. Later, an email was shared with me that was addressed to Mr. Brogley and Mrs. Bennett, which helped me with a timeline of when this would have happened. I could not find any notes that I may have taken at the time of the phone conversation, so it's still just a vague memory. Further on down, it said, I also offered up a suggestion for a plan that could work for Mr. Francois and Mrs. Dempsey, our special ed director, on a transportation solution. They were going to meet on a day that I was out of the building for an appointment. I do not know if they met or if they made any decisions about the transportations. Knowing your family as well as I do, I regret this ever happened. Trust me when I say that my conversation with Kylie would have been set up to have her let me know right away if something would have happened again on the bus. I would in no way imply that Lucas would have been at fault, but trying to help protect him in any way I could. I will once again speak to Luke about transportation alternatives for the high school student and bring this to a conclusion. I'm sorry for such a delay in any type of response. Now my question is, how can Mr. Francois say that we had no knowledge of such threat when there is clear proof? And Mr. Steffes, I don't know you all that well, other than we share the same occupation, but I would not be very pleased having my name on a letter to an attorney that did not state the facts. I find it absolutely appalling that Mr. Francois would lie to an attorney when asked about the situation of this magnitude. I want to thank Mrs. Bennett for doing the right thing at the time of the incident, but also now for admitting that the situation did happen and she was honest about it. I would also like to thank Mr. Wainwright for admitting you at least had vague knowledge of it, and also for apologizing. I have no idea if Mr. Francois and Mrs. Dempsey met on a transportation solution. All I know is the student is still on the bus as of 2 weeks ago, and we have chose to use different services unless we absolutely have to ride the bus. I'm very proud to call myself a Mineral Point alumni. And as most of you know, nobody bleeds blue and white more than I do. But I am ashamed that a school district whose teachers are held at such high standards, and these standards I firmly believe these same teachers have not only achieved but have excelled in, certain administrators can't say the same, and that is unacceptable to me. Please understand that in no way do I blame this school board or any past school boards for this situation, because you had no knowledge of it. But now you have the facts, and everything I spoke of is the truth. I will lastly leave you with this. My grandfather told me a long time ago that a thief is someone you can watch, but a liar is someone you can never trust. I firmly believe every parent, student, alumni, and faculty member deserve better. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Gary. May I ask a question? May I ask a
Yeah, go
question?
ahead, Kelly.
What's your next step with dealing with this, Gary, and what would you like the recourse to be?
Well, I think you have to be fair and respectful to the school board and let them handle this situation. And I guess we'll see what happens from there. If we don't find the solution acceptable, then we might proceed into a further matter.
Your children are no longer riding the bus, you hear?
If we have to, we will ride the bus.
No child should be afraid to ride a bus. There's no reason for that. You can't put money in front of children. I don't know what the school district gets, but he's horrified. It should never happen. And to brush it under the table, God, you gotta be ashamed of yourself. I am. I feel bad for it.
We will have some type of response, Gary and Greg,
I appreciate
in
that.
the very near future. There's another name on the list. Greg, would it be your name?
I don't know why I put that on there. I'm just here for support.
All right. Okay.
Thanks, Gary.
Anybody else? All right, we'll move on.
Is this something we can discuss in closed session tonight?
Because it wasn't posted, but.
There was closed session. We will get a response back to the family, Lou, and Mitch, and Vicki, is this student in your school, Vicki?
He is now, but when it happened, he was at
He was
elementary
not.
school.
Okay. I guess up to the board, if we want one closed session at a time, we move in, we will. Any other communications from the board or the citizens? Elementary School Planning Committee.
I'd like to invite Maggie Tucker and Leah McDonald to come to the table and join us just briefly for an update of our last elementary school planning committee meeting. And then we will turn it over to Christy Monk is here, and we'll share some information that was shared with the committee, and then we'll ask Leah and Maggie to come back up again after the same report has been delivered. Yeah, two chairs there, go ahead.
Sit?
You'll come
Yeah.
forward if you want. Prefer to stand, you can do that too.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Hello, my name is Maggie Tucker.
Leah McDonald.
I've met Leah before. So we are here, as Luke said, to update you on the last meeting, to kind of set the stage for FEH to give a presentation, and then we'll come back to you and speak for a couple minutes. First, I'd like to say, every time, thank you to the board for allowing this community committee to take place. I think it's a really good step, and I think that the solution, if a solution is come to, it will be a result of a lot of minds giving it a lot of thought, which is always a good thing. Our last meeting, we had, prior to that, we had taken a tour with FEH of 2 schools that they had renovated, added on to, and changed in different ways. It really helped us to see spaces like that modified, to see modern spaces that we don't really have represented in the elementary school right now, and to see what can be done in marrying 2 spaces together into a new facility. It was really great to go see actual physical spaces.
It was, the first school that we saw, and forgive me, I can't remember, I don't know if
Table
you.
mount.
Table mount, I thought was a better example of kind of, a lot of the things that they were finding challenges with were similar to, I think some of the challenges that we currently are, have discussed in terms of capacity and just some of the different needs. So I think it was interesting to see some of their solutions. And so I think it just gave a better idea of what that could look like. And a lot of it was, just utilizing space and taking into consideration the way that the building was laid out in terms of, managing how the bus lines came in and just some of that morning traffic, some other things. So I think there were some good creative things given the parameters of that particular space and the environment that they had there.
Yeah. I think some other thoughts that we've had so far that would be helpful to share are that we as a committee are trying to not kind of put the cart before the horse, and that we are trying to not have a preconceived notion of what might be a good solution for the issues that are popping up. FEH, I think, will be a good partner in kind of fleshing out different options. In addition to that, we're really trying hard to kind of nail down, and FEH is helping with this also, what the actual goals are of the committee and of any possible renovation or expansion. It started off as capacity, but as you'll hear, there are some other issues that FEH has identified. And in addition, in our strategic plan for the school, there is reference to being a leader in education, to having innovation and technology present, and to have a community partnership, having spaces for community perhaps, or having more community involvement. And all 3 of those goals can be really helped along by having spaces that are able to accommodate them, especially having to do with innovation technology and new ways of thinking and teaching. So
I think with that, we can open up to FEH for their presentation, and then we can come back for any questions and any follow-up.
yes.
Thank you. We introduced Christy Monk is here to give a couple of reports. These are the same identical reports that were given to the Elementary School Planning Committee. There are a few other members here. I see Bridget and is Morgan here? I know she said she was possibly coming. But there are other members here too, so as we go along, if there's questions for the committee and Larry, we can certainly answer. Which one would you like to hold up first, Christy?
I think I'll do the assessment, not the condition assessment, if you don't mind. And this is a draft version. We've been tweaking it a little bit based on the most recent meeting that we had. I put it in the wrong order. But I'll take you through the report briefly, and if you have questions or would like more in-depth, I guess you've had a chance to read it. Everybody?
Right, this starts on page 10 in the board
Okay,
packet.
super. Well then, I was going to surpass the executive summary and start with the architectural review, which would be page 5. So generally, I do have to say that the building is in good shape. Based on what I've seen at the exterior, there are some minimal sealant and masonry items, but generally the exterior of the building is in very good shape. And I commend you, you have
very nice durable finishes on the interior, and the building with masonry the building itself is in very good shape, so. The pictures, how about we just talk about the pictures? Is that gonna work okay? You can tell me what you wanna,
Page 17, Larry, is where.
oh, you got the black and white, the pops of color to make it. But that top picture there, it shows that there is a pier at the front of the building that has some masonry cracking, and that should be fixed. But generally, there's a little bit of cracking around the cafeteria and a little bit of masonry cracking at this location, but it's very minimal and easily fixed. No big stress fractures or movement or anything like that on the exterior. And then the lower picture shows some portions of sealant around the metal panel and around the doors need to be replaced. And sealant is just an ongoing maintenance item. So that's usually on the list. The second page shows, I believe, what's already on your radar, in that the doors and door frames are rusting and ought to be replaced. Salt is not very kind to them. The second picture shows the roof. The roof is recently replaced. It's in great shape. I reviewed it. It looks awesome. That made me so happy because the roof is, as you know, a very big item. So I was pleased to see that this didn't need any work. And then the bottom picture shows the front entry, and as you already know, there are sloping sidewalks, there are ramps, there are stairs. There's a whole site component at the building here that really ought to be evaluated in a bit more detail, with the sloping of the accessible stalls and the stairs down to the entrance, and then how people get into the front door if they are mobility impaired. So there's that. On the interior of the building, again, very nice finishes. Terrazzo is a favorite of mine. You do have some settling on the lower level of the floor, and I believe anybody who's been in the building has been aware of that. But it looks like the 3/4 of an inch that it has settled has not moved. So it's done settling. At this point, it's what do we replace, how do we handle the floor transitions, how do we provide sealant at some of the joints, and maybe replace the ceiling grid so that the cracking is less noticeable. So that is a fairly minor thing. There are, let's see, I guess we can go to the next picture. I've read it in great detail, so if you have questions, feel free to stop me. But one of the items with the gym is that the floor is in good shape, but you do not have the space around the gym floor that you are essentially required or supposed to have. You should have 10 feet on all 4 sides. And I believe I measured, it's one of my appendix pictures, you might have about 3 feet, if that, around the perimeter of the gym, which can be a safety hazard for the kids using it and competing, in that you can hit the wall.
I had a question, because that seems to be the biggest single ticket item in this whole thing, right?
Yes, agreed.
And that's a brand new floor.
Yeah.
Are regulation type games played in that gym?
I don't believe it's a regulation court.
It's too small. It is not a full-size court.
So, it's used primarily for gym classes, for PE?
PE and lunch, yes.
So could the lines be redrawn so that it would allow for 10 feet?
It could, you could reconfigure it with potentially fewer backboards, or we could restripe it. Yes, you could. It wouldn't be used for regulation games or anything, but it sounds like it isn't as such.
Yeah, I'm not saying, down the road, not having a new gym or whatnot, but if it truly is a safety issue and it has a quick fix component to it, maybe something like that should be done if there's a safety issue for children right now.
It would require moving
It
the
would make it
baskets.
considerably smaller, and you have to move the backboards. Those are the kind of the 2 key pieces.
I do know it's used quite a few club basketball organizations, 4th, 5th age level.
And I think if you lose 6 feet all the way around, the court might become prohibitively small. So it might be too small at that point. That's something that I suppose we could ask the club.
So we're at insurance risk right now if something were to happen to a child
that close.
Potentially, yes.
Okay.
Should games not be played there?
It's a question for the board.
I mean, it's.
Are
it's-
there
I don't
games-
think there, I don't
are
think
there
even club
games
games.
played?
No,
No,
there's
just
practice.
practice.
Just
Practice.
Youth practice.
Yeah, there's no.
Well, should there not even be practices there? I mean, if it's a safety issue,
What you'll encounter is there's zero gym space for them to then use in the area. The high school's used all the time. They actually got kicked out of some of their time because of some middle school athletics, because they don't have space for their participation.
even that far gym, that's in use too?
Oh, yeah.
Year round.
Yeah.
Everything's booked.
Well,
So there's
Is it any more of a risk for club sports though than it is our bio classes?
They're running
Well,
drills,
yeah.
they're not
Yeah,
playing.
they're not really
games.
playing a game, they're just practicing and running drills, and we've got PE classes in there every day.
Right,
You don't
and
have a
maybe
lot
we
of
could
space.
add some more mats and that would,
Solve a lot of
you
it.
know, at least you have a buffer, so if you did hit the wall, you'd hit the mat.
yeah, it's.
That would be
it's-
one
Mat.
potential.
It's a soft
Yeah,
floor.
well,
It's very,
did you interpret that differently than I did? Okay, you liked it.
Imagine bouncing up walls.
Well, if we just give it a little extra spring, it might be all right.
I think it warrants further discussion.
I would concur with that.
The other thing too is just, has nothing to do with sports, but the acoustics in there are, if you've ever, Bridget can remember the
Lunch.
launches. So I talked to Kevin about putting in some sound absorbers in there, and that can happen soon.
Yeah, you can do that quite easily.
But could those sound absorbers, I'm wondering, could those also serve as
safety.
They aren't very flexible, so
Okay.
you'd have to do both mats and acoustical panels. And the acoustical panels would be up high, and then the mats would be, up to 6 feet around the perimeter. So that is something that could be considered in the short term to make it slightly more functional.
Yeah, it's surprising that this is first being raised now, when the floors are brand new. I I'm surprised by that.
No, the recommendation is fairly new, because I don't know that there's 10 feet in the middle school gym.
I think it has evolved over a period of time, but I couldn't tell you exactly when that 10-foot requirement came into play, but probably when insurance got bigger.
Why don't we continue on with the assessment and then save our questions?
Right, but if something happens with a full limb,
Right.
then it's with hydration.
Do you want to continue?
I would love to continue. The next picture shows hooks and backpacks in the corridor. That is a life safety code violation. You are not allowed to have flammable materials in the corridor over a certain percentage if you do not have sprinklers. And you can have those items in the corridor if you have metal lockers. So I believe that is in the recommendation table, but the 2009 Life Safety Code, so it's a new deal, used to be allowed. Life Safety Code does restrict the amount of flammable materials that you can have in your exit. So it would require either a sprinkler system or metal lockers. The next item shows, and have these been removed, the table and the, okay, so this has been revised, but this is the top landing of an exit stair that was used as a small breakout space, and that is not required by code. Anything that is in the egress path really ought to be dedicated for people getting out of the building. So these tables have been removed, and I left it in here just so you are aware of the requirement, but that has been rectified. The lower picture there shows that currently the door hardware, my understanding is always locked. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the doors are always locked, and so they have this latch shield over the hardware so that kids can go in and out. But then if there is an incident where they need to lock the doors, they raise the shield. But as part of the egress corridor requirement, that corridor wall needs to be 1 hour rated. And in order to get that fire rating, you need to have that door latched. So that door needs to be fire rated and it needs to latch, and you can't have a louver in the door. So there are a lot of requirements that go along with that being 1 hour rated. Because the idea is we're protecting people as they exit the building.
We addressed that at the last meeting when we had the safety report. And we were working on that. Is that correct?
We're working on it. We don't have a solution yet, but we're working on it.
Okay. And that is something that I would recommend reviewing as part of your safety group, but then if any project happens, a larger comprehensive door hardware review is something that I would recommend as well. That helps with keying as well, master keys and building masters and stuff like that. Let's see. So now the last three pictures are ADA related. So I know you got a new gym floor, but the threshold into the gym is not accessible. It is too steep. It is about 1 3/4 inches in height in the thickness of the wall. So it is too steep, and I don't necessarily have a solution for it because it would require ramping into the gym in some fashion, but it's too steep, it's not in compliance.
So my understanding about ADA is that at any time, someone could sue us for an ADA violation, and we are just lucky that we have not been approached or sued.
There's some leeway in the accessibility standards related to if you have an existing building in terms of a fixture count and steepness of ramp, so you do have a little bit of leeway, but yes, that is the general idea. If you don't meet ADA and there isn't a lawsuit, that's how you get caught in violation. And again, you have this very tricky existing site, so some of the exterior components that don't meet ADA, you are a bit at the mercy of, it's an existing condition, you have a little bit of leeway. If there is an infraction, you might be able to rectify it, and then that would be the solution. Because the exterior, the second picture there, those are the accessible spaces that are very steeply sloped. So if somebody with mobility issues were to park there, it's just very steep and steeper than allowed. And then the third picture shows that the bathroom, you need some piping insulation under the sinks. That was common in all the bathrooms, and this bathroom does have an accessible stall. But the newer bathrooms near the elevator, those are not accessible toilet stalls. They aren't the 5 feet by the 5 feet requirement. And I believe you will likely, if you were to make them accessible, you would not have enough fixtures. So that's something that would need to get addressed depending on how the bathrooms would get reconfigured. But the materials are in great shape. And you have a beautiful building. So this is kind of the Debbie Downer report, and I apologize, but I'm trying to bring to light the deficiencies so that you're aware of what you have. So this chart, if we could just go to the very end, I will, of this chart, there's one big lump sum number, and I would like to clarify that number for you. So this is the draft report, and it lists $3.633 million. So if you could get your pencils ready, I would like to break it down. So the code, maintenance, and ADA costs for the school are listed at $1.677 million. And this is not a cost estimate. This is a basic budget number. So $1,677,000. That is for the code that covers code, maintenance, and ADA. Now, the new gym is listed in the chart. I figure it's a separate line item. That is $1.75 million. And that is a full-size court. You could fit maybe 3 rows of bleachers, so it would be maybe 300 seats or so of bleachers, depending on.
What was the figure on that?
That was $1.75 million. And that would be the regulation height and the 10 feet around the perimeter, and that would allow for some bleacher seats. But the bleachers aren't in the estimate because I don't know if you need seating at the gym. So that would be a question that it didn't come up in our meeting, but that was another thing. And then a third line item, I do not have a cost for this, are the site modifications. We know there are some pretty significant site modifications, but we would feel better if we talk to a civil engineer to get some budget numbers. So that's a breakdown of that 3.633 number.
Christie,
Yes.
in terms of the doors, I remember Kevin saying something about that it was hard for kids to open them. And then also,
Okay.
you know, it was just for little kids especially.
Yeah.
And then also, like the second floor, where someone like in a wheelchair would have to get in, there's no button for them to push. Is that part of it?
Technically, the button is not required,
Someone has. Okay.
but the 5 pounds of pressure to open the door is an ADA requirement.
I don't know if that was a part of your list.
You know, well, hardware is a part of my list, and so we can lump it in there, and I'll evaluate the numbers, make sure that you have it covered. Okay. Let me just write door closers. I know I have the exterior ones that stick so the doors stay open. And then the table has photo references, which are then included in the appendix, and then the existing building plans. So that is my report, and I would welcome questions, but it pairs nicely with the space needs assessment. And I didn't know if we should jump right into that. I don't want to take forever. I know you guys are have a lot of things to discuss tonight, so I
Where was that new gym going to be located?
don't know yet.
Okay, that wasn't in the...
Mm-mm. No,
Quick question on the plumbing.
yes,
You had 360,000 figured.
yes.
Does that include all the plumbing,
That's new piping everywhere. Yep,
sewer and water?
that's just the water pumping.
Just water.
Yep. I was told by Roger that the existing piping was left in place for the most part, and then it was added onto or new fixtures off of it, but that the piping is corroded and at this point,
So it's just a pressurized water?
yes,
It's a galvanized
Yes.
steel.
yes, they got nice.
Did you address the drainage from the parking lot? Is the front of the building the east side?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that would be the north side, and there's a concern about drainage off of that parking lot, and so that would all be regraded. Was that something that you addressed?
That is, we don't have a budget number. We are aware that there is a site issue, but we didn't talk to a civil engineer. We didn't have anybody on board to talk to at this point.
Okay. Was that brought to your attention?
Yes, it was. But other than knowing that there are site drainage issues, I don't have a budget number.
Okay. Because I was under the impression that eventually will cause damage to that building if that drainage is not fixed.
Well, yes, anytime you get water that comes near the building, that would be an issue. And with some of the potential for moisture entering the building with the flashing and certain sealant locations where the moisture could enter, I would think that would be what you're saying.
If the drainage isn't fixed, the other stuff isn't going to work.
Okay. So, space needs assessment. And I know you've combed through this in great detail and analyzed all the items in yellow. And I don't know exactly how detailed we want to get. But if you look at the chart, there's the existing square footage in the first column. The second, those are the national standards. And you'll note, as we went through, we didn't necessarily follow the national standards. We put it there as a guideline, but we didn't necessarily follow it because every school is different and you don't, it's a guideline. It's like Pirates of the Caribbean. They're just guidelines. And then we have our proposed square footage. And then the enrollment is just for your reference. So principal's office is 144 square feet. Typically it would be 250 square feet so that you could have a table for small group meetings. So that is undersized. Want to speak to that at all?
Well, I told you at the meeting, and I tell me that my last office was smaller than my current one. I thought I was.
Okay, well, we're trying to follow the
window.
standards. I guess the window is nice, maybe it feels better with the window. Pupil services right now is 80 square feet, 150 would be the recommendation. Again, try to have a desk with potential for some meeting space, maybe at the desk. The staff restrooms, there are 2 staff restrooms, they are not accessible. our recommendation would be to make them accessible, two accessible staff restrooms. The staff lounge is undersized at 246 square feet. 800 would be the recommendation, and that would include the mailboxes and includes workroom components. Well, I guess the workroom would be separate, but it would incorporate more than just some tables for the staff lounge, maybe a kitchenette and mailboxes, stuff like that. There's no conference room right now. I know that the front room is used for conferences sometimes when it's not being used for small group teaching. The one kind of at the very front of the office, in front of the reception area. So we would recommend a conference room. And the waiting area is very small right now, where you have intermingling of visitors and sick kids. So we would recommend that the waiting area get expanded. Additional storage space, a teacher workroom. Quote storage and lost and found is currently under the stairwell. I believe that's where it was, or is that where all the extra?
We moved that.
Oh, you moved that, okay. And then the nurse currently has a very restrictive space, so we would recommend that that be enlarged. So you can see that right now there's 2,100 square feet, and we would recommend that that get bumped up to approximately 4,000 square feet for the administration portion.
No, I'm sorry. That is the same.
Okay.
Carrying closet?
What's that?
Carrying closet?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the one that you opened and like stuff jumped out at you because it was so full of stuff, so we would recommend that the coat storage lost and found be enlarged. And then, is there a question about the table? Okay. Now, this early childhood and pre-K, right now these two classrooms are located on the second floor. It's not supposed to be on the second floor. The little kids need a direct to exterior path, because the little kids are the ones that you need to get them out as quickly as possible. They might wander. Generally, you don't put any early childhood, young kid classrooms on the second floor. We would recommend that this potentially get swapped with the library, because the little kids find their way out, have to go down the stairs and then make sure they go out the proper door. It's better if they just have a direct to the exterior way to get out of the room.
And not just for the little kids, but they tend to take longer. Getting on many valleys, the older kids waiting for them to leave.
Okay, good point. So our recommendation is that those rooms are very nicely sized, but they really ought to be on the first floor. And then if you do that, can we add a door that goes directly outside, depending on where they end up in the space? Kindergarten, one of the kindergarten classrooms got partitioned because there's some deficiencies of space, so we would recommend that a properly sized 1,200 square foot kindergarten classroom be added back in. And then for first grade, those rooms are too small based on the national standards. And Kevin got into more detail with the planning committee about enrollment and classroom stuff. I can go into that detail, but you can see that first grade has about 2,800 square feet, and we would recommend closer to 37. So there's definitely a deficiency there.
What are national standards based on?
National standard, I believe it's a group of people who met from different districts
I
and
mean,
different.
is it based on a number of kids in the classroom, or what is national?
Actually, the national standards listed here are tailored based on the enrollment. I believe if you look at that, like that 1,000 square feet is associated with 18 kids for the national standards. So that the existing, oh, I'm sorry, thanks Luke. So the far column is associated with the square footage. So in early childhood, you'd have 20 kids. In first grade, you'd have 24 kids in that 1,000 square feet. So if you decided that you would never get to that point and that you would always have less than a certain number, those could be tweaked slightly. And
Well,
potentially
that's why I was just
shorter.
thinking you're talking national standards is 24 kids, and we're looking at 15 and 16.
Mhm.
So actually, the square footage in the smaller rooms is actually larger.
The
At this
last year
point.
would have been 22, 23, and 20. So, you know, kind of keep that in perspective as these classes go through. This is a smaller class right now in the first grade. That's the small kindergarten class that came through, but you know, typically we're a little bit more than that, but just keep an eye on that. So what size of classroom do you want to have? And we're looking to have, we're in this bubble section where, do we go with 3 sections or 2 sections of classes? And if we
You
go
get
with 2 sections.
bigger rooms, and it does definitely change the space needs if you were to go to 2 rooms for each class, change your ratio. But that is a good question, thank you.
So just to clarify, the 1,000 is based on a capacity of 24 students?
Correct.
Okay.
So your 775 would work with your existing enrollment.
And also our existing policy, because your actual is your 15 number, the 15?
That's the current, yes.
Yeah.
And then the capacity is, yes, the capacity is the 18.
Okay.
Next year, those classes will be, numbers stay exactly the same, it'll be 18, 20, and 20 for the first grade.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Now for the rest of the classes, you'll notice that there's a space identified as breakout space currently in corridor. Well, the egress corridor is utilized really well for small group teaching and for breakout classes. So our recommendation is you remove that from the corridor and you provide a smaller space. Is my math wrong? Oh, okay. So that's 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Our recommendation would be to create smaller breakout spaces for small group student teaching. And if you go to special ed, right now there is an intervention room that is partitioned off of the library, so we would recommend that that become its own room. Space-wise, it seems large enough, but I believe there's, it's acoustically not separate, and there's a lot of interruption that happens between the library and who's in that room. So there's that. If we look at national standards, recommend 2 group team project rooms that would be part of the library. And for PE, we have listed here the gym at 51 feet by 72 feet. That is a court with the 10 feet all the way around at 7,280. And right now you have a gym that is 3,672. So it's twice the size of what you have. And then taking the PE office and storage out of the music area and giving it its own space and separate PE storage space. So that number, you can see, definitely bumped up. And for the cafeteria.
I have a question about the
Yes.
gym, Rebecca. What is that number based on? Is there a
Court
capacity?
size. Just the court size.
Just court size?
Mhm. Yep, it's court size with the perimeter.
Okay.
And then if you wanted bleachers, that would impact that number a little bit, depending on how many bleachers you would want or how many people you'd want to seat. And then for the cafeteria, we have a toilet that would be a slightly larger than the 18 square foot staff toilet room in the kitchen right now. So that's a very small bathroom, and we would recommend that they get larger. For arts and music,
Those toilets, that's for adults?
yep, it's in the kitchen.
Okay.
Yep.
It's literally the toilet went to the walls.
It's smaller than a motorhome, I think. For arts and music, we are recommending a slightly larger music storage room and a dedicated music office. And if the PE storage moves out, then then the office could take, it would be a shuffle, and that's why you see the 112 square feet for music office, because it would utilize the room size that's there. Because there are 2 rooms off of the music room that are shared with other things right now. And then for restrooms, we are recommending 2 unisex/family restrooms, and then by federal law, you are required to provide a lactation room, which is just a separate room that locks, that is private, that would be available for that use. That doesn't mean that you can't use it for something else, so it could be a small meeting room, but that it would need to be available if needed for its original purpose. So that is it in a nutshell. Currently have approximately 60,000 square feet, and the recommendation is for 70. And you can see national standards are about 85,000. We would be happy to try to help you accommodate that amount of space at that site, but based on how you currently operate, our recommendation is about 72,000 square feet. So it's a sizable jump, but it's not as much as it could be, based on how you currently operate with the space.
And over half of that is from the gym.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Gym, admin, and a few classrooms that would get enlarged. And that isn't to say that hypothetically, by no means a plan, but if you were to do a new space, that's not to say that it's just a big shuffle. It's just a big old puzzle that we enjoy figuring out on. If you pull these spaces out, how might you accommodate those rooms? So that's our.
It wouldn't be quite that, Larry. The gym would be doubled, I think, right? Going from 36 to 72.
Where are we at?
36.
Yeah, so the gym is approximately maybe a third
So
of
a
it.
third. It's
Well,
not half.
it depends if do you add the PE storage into that, or do you just look at the gym? Because if you look at the,
Maybe I'm looking at the wrong, I'm looking right up
if you look at the gross total area, you're at
here.
4,900.
4,900.
And we would recommend close to 98.
Oh, sorry.
For the
That's
gym.
what I was looking at.
Okay.
Okay.
So it is approximately half, just under half of the recommended expanded area would be the gymnasium. And then the kindergarten classroom that's currently undersized, that was the big one. And admin, principal, that was definitely a big one.
So we got any more questions? Because I think we have.
Yeah, I'll be happy to step back and.
Maggie, to come back up, I have some questions.
It's very helpful analysis. Very
It's a lot
clear,
of
very-
information, and I hope it is legible and that you were able to follow it.
Yeah.
And I'm here for questions. You can even read it on the tiny little tablet. Nice. But I'm here for questions, and
I think we can fit both you gals up there.
I'll grab a chair. You can stay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for sticking with me.
So, Maggie and Lee, I have a question.
Yeah.
So, did you feel that the gym was a priority with the committee? Because it looks like to me like the gym and the admin and what? I mean, I want to know what you think is a priority for the students.
I would say that the gym feels like a priority, and it's not only to have a gym space, it's also to have that secondary large space. So currently, there's not a second large space in the school. So when there's inside recess, they're in the hallways, or if there's a program, gym class gets booted, and there's a domino effect that happens there. Same with lunch, you can't do things in the gym during lunchtime.
The janitorial staff and their, if you've ever watched them break down after lunch for the PE class right after, is phenomenal. The staff at the school is amazing. The precision that they have to get that space set up for the next thing. So I think it's accommodating for those, you know, being able to accommodate for the indoor recess for the different times and some of those things. And having a space that's available for the community to use outside of the typical hours. I think you've got a very big space that, you know, there are other interests in terms of aligning it with some of the strategic plan. I do think it's a way to bring the community in and to bring more use
And
into
did the
the
committee feel that way?
Yeah.
So,
And that is feedback that we've gotten from staff as well.
I just wanted to make one point.
Yeah.
I was at the public meeting, and so as part of what we're doing, we're helping facilitate the goals for success. don't have them yet, I apologize, I'm a bit belated. But we talked about providing areas in the school for larger gatherings and events where the community might take part, where you don't interrupt spaces to hold large gatherings. And then we also talked about using the building for wellness, recreation, and not just kid learning. So those two would as high-level goals, would tie into potential space.
So there was a lot of talk about admin space, but I didn't hear a lot of talk about the student space. So if you had to prioritize, would you prioritize the student space over the admin?
I don't know that that's a question that the committee has really delved into, but it's certainly something we can take back and discuss next week. Because it's not something we specifically addressed unless you feel differently. Maybe you want me to speak on your
specifically.
But we can certainly.
We'll have goals to help facilitate this, and I think the 10 or so goals for success that we'll work on generating will lend themselves to the decision-making process too.
Thanks.
Sorry.
No, that's fine.
I scribbled them.
So in this plan, there wasn't a separate cafeteria from the gym? The gym will still be used as the cafeteria?
Our thought, let me. Right now, yeah, I think I need to talk with Kevin about this, because the cafeteria is currently in the gym, and it's zeroed out, and our recommendation would likely ultimately be that you have that cafeteria space and then the gym separate. So that's gonna affect this number. I apologize that math isn't there, but I think it would be something that the school district should consider. Do you keep that space that's currently used for the cafeteria as kind of a swing space / multi-purpose space, but then also provide a dedicated athletic gym space?
But you wouldn't use that as the cafeteria?
The gym as the cafeteria?
Yeah, but
No,
is there?
I would use the current
I mean,
gym.
the current
Yes, I would continue using the current gym as the
It's right near
cafeteria.
the kitchen.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I would maintain that as long as we can figure out some of the floor transition
Yeah.
things, and then it would provide a separate a dedicated athletic space. But that would then allow you to have, when it's not used as a cafeteria, kind of a swing space for multiple uses.
And
So I
not to be
apologize.
too specific, but one of the places we went, the first school, that seemed similar to what, if we were to do an expansion project, that seemed like sort of a good model, and again, that's a big if. But in that case, they started out with a similarly sized gym / cafeteria, added a gym, and still used that original space for a cafeteria, and there was a Cub Scouts meeting happening in there when we were there, for example.
Yeah, and I have been there in the past, and it's still used for athletic purposes, so that doesn't mean you can't use it for athletic purposes, it's just that isn't its primary intended use.
You can still play dodgeball.
Exactly.
So what are some of the things that the board is looking for in terms of prioritization, or the next kinds of questions that you want the community to consider at our upcoming meeting?
Well, I think that your information gathering and that, as long as we have specific numbers, then I think that's something that you can give us your priorities and we evaluate those priorities.
With the numbers here, I mean, would you envision an additional addition that's another cost on top of the costs that you itemized? Because a lot of it, you had the space assessment.
Yep, you
And for
kind of talking
classrooms,
to
it seemed like that you need more space if you're gonna meet those. So you got the one number you presented us with.
yes, and
And then it seems like
wrote down specifically
Based
some
on
of
the
the
meeting,
answers.
based on the meeting, based on the meeting
There it is,
that we
okay.
had, the presentation that we had from you guys last 2 weeks ago. The first number was if we wanted to get right now up to code, compliant,
Yes.
ADA, safety, all that kind of stuff. That's the number for that.
There
Which
it is, I
also
found it.
has the gym. Oh, yeah.
Okay. So the approximate 1.7 million, those were the code and maintenance. upgrades. And then the space needs would be the gym, and then it would be the classroom and admin space. You might be looking at a number, don't quote me, now I'm on camera, about 3.5 million or so in space needs plus the 1.5 for the code maintenance and ADA items.
Does that include the 1.75 for the gym?
I have to do the math again, I apologize.
Okay.
So there's another number that we're looking for.
Yes, it sounds like there is. Based on the space needs, we'll have to conjure some more numbers. And I have some general square footage numbers, so that won't be an issue, but we will come armed with that information next Wednesday to the group.
I have a question.
We may want it before that.
Okay, that's fine. Like right now?
No.
Okay. Okay, that's
We may
okay.
want it before
Yeah,
that.
that's fine. I can do that.
If, and this is something that has been talked about time and again, but if the fifth grade moving to the middle school, if that happened, and I don't know if you even looked at that yet, and you were able to reconfigure the walls, could you address all the space needs at the elementary school if the fifth grade was not there? Is that something you've explored?
We have not. At this point, we've identified the needs and we've met with the group to try to create goals to evaluate the direction. Hypothetically, if we were to evaluate different options, that would be part of our charrette process where we would meet with everybody and explore the multiple options with the group.
And has the committee looked at this building to see if there's room for the fifth grade without there being an addition?
We've gotten feedback from Superintendent Francois and from other staff members about that question, about looking at that question.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of using space inside this building or adding on to this building are both two of the many options that the FEH will further flush out. We are trying not to go in any one direction, nor are we trying to eliminate anything out of hand at this point, but rather really nail down what the needs and what the desires of the community are. But know that all the options will be explored.
Restructuring was something that was specifically brought up as an option to study.
Yeah, and looking at optimal grade groups to keep together. If you look at the Montfort has the early learning center, the K first grade, I think is all they have, for example. There are other ways that we have discussed, perhaps this chunk of children would be good together or that. But again, trying not to get too deep into the weeds with specific problem solving at this point, more of a broad identification of needs.
Okay. Sounds good.
Can you guys maybe share, because I don't know that any of you will be here when we get to it, just the committee's thoughts on the charrette, why you're in favor of it? Maybe you can tell us a little more in depth about what it is, so we can make more educated.
Speaking of that, Andy, should we just move that up? We can put that right at this part of the agenda.
It is in your action items at the end of the agenda for business services, but certainly you can act on it at any time if you want to do that.
If we have everybody at the table, if we have questions. Thank you. Questions? Is the board okay with moving?
Yeah, I think that, it makes sense, unless there was some reason why it was later in the agenda.
No, just as it was part of business services,
Oh.
and it's an amount over 5,000, so we need board approval.
So, can you clarify, jump in?
No, please do.
So, the charrette, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, because I struggle with that particular word. I think is a great way to engage the community and really take a look at what does the community really want beyond the committee, beyond the board. The timetable of when this is potentially proposed, I think is very good. One of the evenings that it's proposed is the same night as the FFA banquet. The other evening that it's being proposed is parent-teacher conferences. So there will be adults in the building at those times. One of the things that may want to be considered if it was chosen to go with this option is to potentially move the event to the high school the night of the FFA banquet to get more engagement, because that's where I understand the event is held. So there will be parents there during those times. Essentially what, if I understand the process correctly, is FEH brings in 4 architects? 3?
We
Forgive
recommended
me.
another one, so I think it's 3, maybe 4 of us.
Okay, so forgive me if I am not stating that portion correctly, but essentially,
Yeah, and a civil engineer.
the idea is that folks come to the table, present their ideas in terms of needs, and that basically a drawing will be made at that point, is my understanding. And so amongst those options, the things that people like the best will be sort of merged and will eventually come into the final design of what the building will look like to meet the needs of the current students, of the staff, as well as what the community is looking for. And for me personally, I think this is the best way to engage the community in the feedback. So asking them directly. Now, it's always challenging to get folks to show up for these types of events. I think the timing that's proposed is probably the most conducive to that. You can't force anybody to come sit down at the table and say, I'm gonna take 15 or 20 minutes to do this. But the opportunity, it lends itself to be the most conductive to feedback, in my opinion, beyond a smaller scale group. So I don't know what your thoughts are, maybe, but.
Well, I would add to that, yeah, do you have a question first? Yeah.
Did you go to the last one?
I was about to say. So I participated in the elementary tour with the previous firm that the board engaged with, as well as saw their presentations here. And I would say as a community member, I found that the ideas had come sort of fully formed, and maybe it was a good solution, maybe it's the exact right solution, but I could feel that the community engagement portion was missing from what they seemed to.
It was fully formed because that was what was asked of them, so it wasn't presented like this.
Right, and I think that there could be real value in giving an opportunity to people in the community, whether it's just, oh, I know I could do that and I'm choosing not to go participate in this thing, or whether they actually end up there and have an idea that they propose, or an idea that they bounce off of someone, that amount of engagement will help long-term with buy-in. Not only that, having people who have lived here their whole lives and have experienced these spaces firsthand, literally, as well as the teachers would also be given time to give feedback, experiencing these spaces firsthand, that it's sort of like a hive mind thing that will happen, because my understanding is that they will take all of these ideas and gather everything, and that nothing is sort of cast away because, oh, that's impossible, or oh, that's not a good idea, that it's all taken as a whole and will help our goals and the strategy of the school district in general, help to kind of narrow down options in the future.
Yes, we don't have the perfect solution developed yet, and we don't want to tell you what to do. We want you to give us the input, and our goal is to draw it so that you can evaluate, is that something that you want to pursue? And so at our meeting, we did talk about a variety of options to study, and somebody said, well, what about a new building? Well, is that going to be too expensive? We'll give you a number for what that would be. Recording.
We'll see how long it goes around. I just have to put it back.
We'll move on to roof repair.
Thank you, I just want to say thank you. We appreciate your time tonight, it's a late night.
Larry did. I didn't. Larry did.
I have a remote control and it's turned off right now.
So I don't muck it up.
Okay, are you ready to talk about these fabulous re-roof documents? Chair. Did everybody review the specifications? Let me see. So, based on our report, if you remember, our water intrusion report that was presented a few months ago, we highlighted certain areas of the roof that needed modifications to prevent water from getting in the building. And then at that time, we're also tasked with replacing the roof because it was towards the end of its life expectancy. So these documents are essentially, we're removing the existing roof membrane. We're providing 2 new inches of rigid insulation. We're providing a new roofing membrane, and then we are removing pieces of the masonry, portions of the wall around the gym where the water was getting in and around the penthouse. And then we're also, don't have a laser pointer, but we're also resolving the roof drain issue that's near the front entrance, and then yes, thank you, and then reworking the metal roof valley where the water is getting under the roof panels, reworking the valley to prevent water from getting in the building. So these bid documents, you'll note that there's a specification section that talks through the different products. We are proposing a white PVC membrane and 2 inches of high quality, moisture resistant rigid insulation. We've limited the manufacturers. We'll be removing portions of the brick and providing a new flexible flashing to prevent the water from, water's going to get in the brick cavity, it's just how do we get it out without making any more issues. So we're providing a channel for the water to exit the building. And you'll note that the way the drawings are structured, it took the original roof drawings from the bid documents, or from the as-built set, and then I showed the modifications in a darker color. So the gym wall section, you can see that we're removing 3 to 4 courses of masonry, providing new flashing, and then I talked with Kramer Brothers, and their recommendation is to replace the majority of the coping around the building so that you have a complete, so that your roof membrane ties into the coping and you have a complete system. And that is all still within their the budget number. We had a maximum of, I believe, $500,000 for design fees and for the construction. And Kramer Brothers has worked with me to make sure these drawings are in keeping with that number, if not below. It will depend on bid day. But I talked with Mitch Gilbertson at Kramer Brothers, and we modified these drawings. So you're getting new coping, you're getting new insulation, you're getting new roof membrane. We're resolving the moisture issues around the building, providing better tapered insulation to some of the roof drains, and also modifying the vertical metal panel. It's okay, on the left side of the gym where the 2 metal panels meet, it's section 2 on A2.2, if you have the, anybody have the drawings up? Okay, it's like right by your mouse.
Right down there.
Right, 2 on A2.2, like right there?
Go up there.
That, okay, that's where you have vertical metal, vertical siding. So we're proposing that that be removed to evaluate fully what's there. We provide new flashing and new stuff on top, and then we put the siding back on. And then the last item that I think is a highlight, because I know you guys are all riveted by this, is if you can go to the front entrance, I'm sorry, back in the plan to the front entrance. You're like, great. Okay. So, is it okay if I stand up and point to it?
Sure.
Easier. Okay. So I want to make everybody aware that I worked with Kramer Brothers, and this wall right here is currently, so this is your sloping roof, and then this is a masonry wall that comes up here. And I talked with Kramer Brothers about a cost-effective way to do stepped flashing along the wall, because you essentially have to step your flashing for your drainage plane. And after some intense discussion, we decided it would actually be better if the wall gets dried out and then we reclad it with a metal panel in lieu of masonry, so that you can get a cleaner drainage plane and a better weather barrier. So I just wanted nobody to be surprised if metal panel goes up, if this is approved. So we are proposing metal panel here, and then kind of fixes along this wall, typical details here, and fixes at the other locations that I noted.
It's not gonna be visible, right? The metal panel?
It will be, well, this wall is visible because it sticks above the roof, but when you see it, you have to be pretty far out before you'd see it, and we're gonna try to match the brick color with a complementary kind of reddish, orangish tone.
Okay.
So most people wouldn't notice it,
Okay.
because most people don't look at ceilings and look at things that architects evaluate. But these are the bid documents. I've got the materials called out. I've got the first page has the notes clearly identifying the scope of work. The project summary on that first page of the drawings lists exactly what needs to happen in terms of the re-roof, the roof repair, and masonry and control joint repair. So we are planning on replacing all of the masonry control joints, doing new sealant, widening the joints where applicable because the masonry has shifted a little bit and the joints are getting too narrow. And then Kramer Brothers will also put together a cost for what it would be to reseal around all the windows. So we're hoping that will then also be included in the budget number. And then, I'm sorry, I almost forgot, we've got, did I get the list of contractors? Okay. Does anybody have contractors they wanted to add to the list that you've worked with? There will now be a metal panel supplier once we get to that point, since that isn't on his list because we added that. But there's a list of people we were going to talk to. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. And then Kramer Brothers is going to work with Roger to set up a time to do a walkthrough with the contractors before bid day. And bid day is March 1st. I'm very proud of the drawings that you can tell, so I'm excited that this is going to hit the streets with your approval. Does anybody need a review of the timeline?
I just got a question.
Question?
And I know white fabric is more reflective than American fabric. Is that the reason why you
Yes.
like
We use it for reflectivity.
Okay.
With the amount of insulation that we have, reflectivity is the direction.
And is there the life of the fabric, the thickness of it?
We're doing a 20-year warranty. It's a 50 mil product, so it's thicker than normal membrane, and I believe we have a 20-year life.
So it's built in just one spec, 20-year, 50 mil, that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yes, and I can verify that if you want, but I'm pretty sure that's what I put in here. And
We talked about having alternative, we wanted to go 40-year,
oh, okay.
60 mil.
I'm sorry, I don't recall. We can do that too. If we want to do that as an alternate, I can definitely add that. It doesn't hurt to get the pricing.
Yeah,
It really doesn't.
personally, I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
I wouldn't take long to do that.
No,
They already have all the numbers, they just change out the membrane cost, so that's a great idea, and I will add that. So we wanted, was there a warranty number that you wanted to hit, and then I'll pick a
so
membrane?
20 years minimum?
20 years what I have specified, I believe.
What is that minimum? So what's industry standard? What would be the maximum warranty life membrane?
I do not know what the maximum is. I know that you can get 20 and
20 is good.
30, I think you can get up to 30.
Lifetime.
And I do know that we're replacing the flashing to get a comprehensive system, which makes it easier to get a warranty, because now it'll be a full system with the snap-on
Why don't
flashing.
we go like 20, 30, and 40?
Okay, so 20-year, 30-year, 40-year, and then thicker membrane to get warranty. Okay, I would be happy to do that.
An explanation on the warranty, because that's a big deal too. What does that mean? A 20-year warranty doesn't mean if it fails in 20 years, they replace it for nothing.
Right, and the way that,
Right.
let me just take a quick peek here. So we do have a no dollar limit warranty that includes consequential damages, 20 years from the substantial completion, and then you have a 2-year special project warranty. So, so in the 20 years, that includes the membrane failing. And in the 2 years, that's if anything happens, yeah, if anything happens. So I will revise the warranty section of my spec to include those 2 additional ones. And then we do also have a sample warranty at the very end here that does go through, you know, what it covers, address, who's warranted, for this, when it would go into effect and stuff like that. And then it excluded from the warranty is lightning, wind gusts exceeding 90 miles an hour, and fire. So they wouldn't cover those. And so there's a list of things that aren't covered. But the warranty will have information specifically about what's covered. But I will add additional verbiage to that.
No wind damage at all.
Up to 90 miles.
Anything over 90,
That's not covered up yet.
it won't be covered, correct. And,
And as long as the bid document is comparable to industry standards, I guess, we're not asking for anything over and above. It's just-
no, you're not. This is, it is a, I would say, standard level.
Not all of us are roofing experts, as you can tell.
No, that's okay. You're gonna get a really nice roof with a comprehensive system. I just wanna make everybody aware, I saved the best item for last. Okay, right now you have ballast on your roof membrane. The joists may be using the ballast structure. The joists that you have in your gym, they may be relying on the load from the ballast to help support the bottom chord of the joists. So I'm planning on Kramer Brothers evaluating those existing joists and getting me that information so our structural engineer can evaluate it. We may need to add bracing to the bottom chord of the joists, because if there's uplift, then it puts the bottom chord in tension, and then you need more bracing to transfer the load to the deck. That's what the structural engineer told me. So the most cost-effective solution is for us to evaluate your joists, potentially add a little bit of bridging so that you do not have to put ballast back on, because that would change things. We don't want to put the ballast back on from a warranty standpoint. It's easier to see punctures. So just so you're aware, in order to structurally make sure we're covered, we're going to evaluate what you have. You may be good to go, but we may have to add some angle members that tie the bottom chord of some of the joists to the deck.
That's your good use.
No, I saved the best. I said it, save the best till last.
In 1990 era construction, would they have done that?
I did evaluate the existing drawings and I looked at the existing spec, and they are using the ballast structurally, based on what I can tell. I have an inquiry into Volcraft, who manufactured the joist, and I haven't heard back yet, because that could help us with our answer too. But the structural engineer can evaluate it, and it's part of the process. It's already included. So we'll have him check it out. But yeah, that wasn't really the best news. I should have started with how awesome the documents were.
It made it seem like it was going to be very exciting.
Well, I left it till the last minute, but I think with those warranty modifications, that this set is all inclusive, and it's here and would give you a nice product, and working with Kramer Brothers to brainstorm solutions that you'll get a good result that will prevent water from entering your building. I do call for any wet insulation to be removed before you put your new membrane on and stuff like that. So we're trying to cover, trying to cover our bases there.
Sounds good.
Are we approving that bid document, or is that something that?
You'll approve the final bids as they come back. We're looking for feedback or any I guess you could put formal action on that if you'd like, but I think this is an opportunity just to weigh in on the bid document for a bill. and I think we've given some recommendations.
So we'll get to see all the bids and evaluate.
Yep, March 1st will be the bid date. I don't know if the location has been set yet.
I would set it here if we need a location, and just make sure the time of the
Okay.
room's available.
And if Kelly has her operations meeting, we can, if we have any other questions on the bid document within the next, what do you think, Kelly?
Week? Yeah, we'll have it this week.
Well, I was hoping that with your permission, I would issue them tomorrow, and then if you have revisions, I can do that by addendum.
Okay.
I like to have 1 week before bid day, I like to leave a week with no changes. So if I could get the changes so that they have a week to find their numbers, that would be my preference.
You will know on the structure before you.
Before bids.
Before bids,
Mhm.
of course, yes.
Yes.
How long will that take you? Basically,
Actually, Kramer Brothers said they'd come do the measuring for me, so they'll be on site and they'll do the measuring, and then it shouldn't take too long for the structural engineer.
Okay.
I don't have an exact time frame since I'll have to ask nicely over engineer, but we'll have that included in our bid number. Or if not completely included, we'll have a contingency allowance that would more than cover it. And we'll want to just make sure that we're in line with your expectations.
And just for the record, the total cost of this project, again, we are thinking,
Project fees, all inclusive, I believe was less than 500,000.
Less than
That was the number, I believe that was set,
okay.
based on the contract that I saw. So, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Am I okay to issue tomorrow?
Yes.
Take the preliminary stamp off with the warranty modification? Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have.
One minute for you.
No, that's 1 minute for you guys. Or is that just normal? Okay.
Especially when I'm around.
Thanks for coming, Christy.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
thank you, everybody. Will I be
Last month.
seeing all the board members on the
Yes.
first?
Yeah,
that's right.
For bids?
You're right.
It'll certainly be an invitation.
Oh, okay, that's right. I'll keep you posted.
Okay.
Put together a bid too.
That's what she said.
School calendar?
Yes, page 43 in your board book, if you're looking to see the three options that were presented. We do have a calendar committee that's been operating and meeting over the past few weeks. Member Gunlock's part of that committee, and it comprises both elementary, middle school, and high school staff. And we work through, and biannually, we put together a calendar that will carry us through for the next 2 years. If and when this calendar is approved, we'll roll it forward for the 19-20 year as well, so that it would mirror each other with any slight modifications for holidays falling on weekdays or the weekend, so forth. You have three options ahead of you. I would just suggest that we looked at board policy before we went through and made sure that all of these calendars meet EPI minimum requirements for minutes, and we looked at other key components with regards to traditional days in our calendar that we want to try to preserve. We look at things like the Iowa County Fair and when that happens and when school starts, and there's a plethora of things that we work through. But essentially, you've got three calendars in front of you. The first calendar is what we would call option A. I would just give you a highlight on all three calendars have a 176-day school instruction period, 176 school instructional days. What differs a little bit is...
Can you bring that up?
Sure, sorry. Thank you.
Do we know which one you're talking about?
Yeah, so all three calendars will have 176 instruction days, and the teachers will be on a 190-day contract. Out of those 190-day contracts, 4 of those are considered holidays, so really there's 186 working days. So that would mean 10 floating PD days, all staff PD days, and work days, and then 176 instructional days. In the first calendar, option A, the real changes, this has all staff attending 5 professional development days with a full spring break week at the last week of March, and then noticing that the last day of school is in the first week of June. So that is option A. How that differs from option B. Option B again still has 176 calendar days. It has a shorter break for those that might want to consider not using a full week. We would start off with 3 days, or just 2 days of, 3 days, March. Here we are down here. A PD day for staff on that Wednesday, not having a full week, with 2 days off for staff. Students would have 3 days off, so it's a shorter spring break This would end the last week of May and not extend into June. And it would have 6 professional development days for staff versus 5 in option A. Option C, again, a 176-day calendar for students. The main differences here is you have a full week of spring break in March. You still end the last week of May, but it reduces the number of professional development days for staff from, the first had 5, the second had 6, this would have 4 professional days. There are some floating professional days in each scenario where staff will put in time on their own, around their own professional development, but the all-staff professional development days in this one is the smallest at 4.
Are there some Wednesdays that are not half-days or early out days then in this calendar, based on what I see? March and the day before Thanksgiving?
March is parent-teacher conferences, so that would double up as for the elementary only. They would use part of their PLC time for parent-teacher conferences, but the middle school, high school would still have a half a day of CRT time or collaborative release time. Same with, I think...
So like on March 6th and March 13th, are those
They're
full
just-
days of school or are they still early?
They're still early release.
Okay, so
Every
they're just not
Wednesday-
shaded?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Every Wednesday, there's no full-day Wednesdays on this calendar
Okay.
for students.
Okay.
The process is to give the opportunity for the board, the community, staff, an opportunity to weigh in on this, these calendars. So we'll be putting this out to all staff for feedback. We'll collect that feedback. Same thing with the community. We'll share the different options from A to B to C. And people are welcome to submit their thoughts, questions, concerns, and then we'll gather that feedback, bring it back to the board at the next meeting in March, and the board can determine a final calendar for 18-19, and then it will also going to be a mirrored calendar for 19-20.
We'll get will we get, my feedback, will we get a bulk like we got last time, or just general comments?
There was a discussion in the committee about whether a vote was or wasn't the best way to go, so I would turn this back to the board and ask what type of feedback would you find helpful for you in the form of staff or community engagement?
Well, personally, I'd like to know if the community wants to stay with the full week for spring break. Because personally, I like B and C. So it just kind of depends on feedback from the community and staff.
I mean, you do like a full week or not a full week?
I personally don't really care, but I want to know what the community, you know, years ago when this was brought on, we did a survey and the community didn't want it, but I believe that's probably changed. And I think now that they've had it for this many years, they probably will want it. So I guess I'd like to know.
We talk about this just about every year, and I'm not even going to say nothing, so B or C is fine with me too.
Thanks for thinking
What were
about
you gonna
that.
say?
You want the
He
100.
doesn't like the.
I don't like spring break, but if we can, it doesn't change the end of, I like to move the end of the school about as far as we can. I mean, I like to see it at the 31st.
And that,
As a former teacher, I think it's healthy. Unfortunately, parents can take their kids out anytime, so they don't necessarily subscribe to that. And I think it's okay.
Well,
I didn't used to think like that until I talked for a while, and then I was like,
and that was part of, Larry, you're not the only one that has a desire for a shorter spring break. So again, we want to put an option out there without just being remiss, and much like the committee was talking about, we're not taking any options off the table. We do want to end as early as possible. Nobody really wanted to extend into June, much further than the first week, so we have an option for that. There is a debate between a shorter spring break and a longer spring break, and so we have those options before us. I'm hearing you'd like to see some feedback, Jeff, specifically from staff or more from community, or both?
Both.
Okay. Do you want it in the form of a vote, or do you want us to just gather comments, or do you want both?
When you say community, you mean parents?
Yeah, it's like, let's get it out there before next month, and if there's somebody that really doesn't want a spring break, let it be known, or maybe there's a lot that absolutely want the spring break now, so.
There's a lot of students that rather have a short, get out of here, buy something.
When you're,
Well, let's,
when you're putting
let's
this
be
out,
clear, they're
You
not
guys come
out
back
earlier
January 2nd with us
on the
until.
two options we're talking about.
March
Correct.
And whether they go
25th.
3 days or 5 days, or get
when, before you fill this out, can you just make sure that those 3 days that are not shaded in that one
No,
column?
I know,
Just to
I know.
limit those
But I
questions.
just said, to Jeff and Larry.
Because everyone, every other, so on.
I think
on
we just need
calendars,
comments.
Sorry.
November 21st.
Here's the deal, the state gives you so many days.
I
There, we
think
want
you were
our
there.
teachers to have
And
days that they have professional develop, we have to
March
teach
6th and
students, we
13th.
have to have
Just aren't
all
highlighted.
the time off for
and the 21st
holidays.
of November.
I mean,
Just not
I don't know how much input we can have here.
I think you did a great job on two of these. I don't like the one that goes way into June, but.
The last time we did the survey, and I told the committee this too, it's just, this is pretty intricate for a lot of people to understand, you know, and so they just wanted like, what kind of the summary that Luke shared, like what are the differences? They don't want to sit down and they don't want to, you know, analyze it to death. They just want to know what the differences are. So if we do ask for a survey, that summary will be included in that. It was not last time, I don't think.
And it may not be the actual calendar that you vote on. To that point, it might be, would you prefer a longer break or shorter break? Would you prefer to get out May 31st or June 5th or June 3rd? Because really, those are the differences between the two. And
Except
there's-
that you've got a third option here that has spring break and school lets out May 31st.
So if they voted in that, that would be captured in that. Because there's a short and a long, and there's a get out early, get out later. And those are kind of two questions that could overlap to be either one of those three calendars. If we're saying the same thing, I think we could capture that and give us, and again, the board has the autonomy to override that, it's just advisory. You know, it's what the,
It was,
Right, and make that clear in that it's not.
it's an
it
advisory.
was interesting to be on there because there were elementary, middle school, and high school. So to listen to all of them, it was really interesting, and you can tell, you know, I mean, there's differences on who wants more time for what and who doesn't, and, but it was just really interesting, you know, to listen to it and see. So they worked together really well.
Are the same number of snow days built into these?
There's three, was it three?
Yeah, three essentially. 173 is when you kick into the makeup days, and all calendars are 176, so there's no
Okay.
advantage for one calendar over another.
Because we're skirting at that right now, we figured, and it actually goes on minutes versus days
Minutes, yep.
anymore.
Yep.
And it's different for the elementary than the high school,
Right.
so there's different thresholds. Okay, we'll bring that back next month with some additional feedback gathered so that you can make an informed decision on which calendar prevails.
Reading of board policy 457.
Policy committee met recently, went through a good number of policies. This is for first review. Policy 457 was drafted by the Wellness Committee. Julie Campos heads that with other staff and community members. This is a policy that needs to be implemented for some accountability measures with the federal department, FDA, what is that, FDA? Not the FDA, school, SFA, school finance. I'm forgetting the acronym, but it's a federal government policy that states that if you're receiving reimbursable aid for lunch, that you will have to have a wellness policy in place that includes certain things. And we've made sure and cross-reference to make sure all of those things are included. So take a look at that policy.
I have a question. It looks like, starting on page 5 to the end, that somehow the RTI policy made its way in here. And I don't know if I'm,
Interesting. Student wellness page.
For the response to intervention?
yeah,
Yeah, somehow that got in here.
like, I think the whole thing, like the, you know.
After page 5.
Yeah,
after
after
the middle
page
of page
5,
Middle
all
of
the
page
way
5.
down to,
Yeah, we'll get that cleaned up for the second revision.
okay.
Not sure what happened there, but obviously two documents merged. Okay, thank you.
And I believe, and I see that you had it, but I believe that anything we had talked about in that policy meeting has been removed from these, right?
That
Like
is
the licensed teacher thing I looked for, and there was one other thing.
Yeah, I double checked that both of the items that were to be removed for the first draft have been.
Okay.
And we're not approving it tonight, we're.
Right, it's the section, yeah.
Yeah.
Any questions? First reading of board policy 343.
343-44, this is the first time I've left it in the draft format. It's part-time open enrollment. As the state in the last round of discussions in law, they have now removed youth options, and so we in turn are removing any policy that mentions or has any statement around youth options, because that's not the prevailing law going forward. It does allow or reinstitutes part-time open enrollment. We used to have part-time open enrollment. It was dropped. It's brought back in this latest round of laws. So we need to have policy around that for students that might choose to partially open enroll yet in the 18-19 school year. So that is for your review. 343.44 is the rule that goes along with part-time open enrollment. So it would be how you handle the enrollment process, step by step, going through the different definitions, the resident students' responsibilities or non-students'
That's all
responsibilities.
state mandated, right? So we don't have, this is all state mandated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The next piece is the technical college course program. Again, this is, then you'll see the counterpart for the college course program. This is the technical course. The intermediate programs start college now, replacing some of the youth options language. And then a rule that goes along with that on how to handle requests for a technical college course program. And then the final is the early college credit program, which is just taking up the technical status and looking at college entry.
This one they were bringing today, I believe, to the state legislature, courses that may not be included in this. Should we wait to pass this until they move one way or the other on that?
What I might
So we don't
suggest,
have to revise it immediately.
we could wait, or we could make an addendum or amendment to
Just
it.
do whatever,
And-
hit the
and
launch.
yeah, and if it's no need for our second and final reading, I would suggest we insert it at that time. The only reason I state that it's maybe timely is we could have students taking a first semester fall, what used to be an option.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, so we want to get some language in place. I don't know, Mitch, when might be the earliest that you would get an inquiry? Probably, I think there's some language out here, even in March or April.
Yes.
You have to notify the school board that you intend to exercise this option, so
Yeah.
we don't have
We're
anything
looking at
imminent
the
right now.
enrollment piece right now, looking at, registering for courses next year now, so I mean, that we would be getting that information here.
So let's try to get the baseline language in place
Yes.
for the process procedure, and then we can make some amendments. I won't go through and obviously read that. The policy committee has had a chance to kind of give it a first run through. We'll have a full month. If we need to meet in between meetings, we certainly can.
Policy number, this is minor, but just policy number 343.44 has still like the footing from WASB,
Thank you.
the footer from WASB on there, and you want to put that in?
That out, yeah.
Budget development timeline.
Okay. Budget development timeline, page 73 in your board packet if you want to review the timeline and related materials. This was also visited and revisited by the policy committee. Basically, our policy 621 lays out the budget preparation process, and then page 74 is the internal budget development timeline for January through October when we adopt the final budget. Part of the discussion is at what point would employees be given the opportunity to identify their needs and their costs, and then when would they possibly present to the board if a cost were to exceed $5,000. The solicitation of budget requests happens now this month. January, February, March is when we start to approach staff about what their potential needs are for next year. But then beginning in April is when we really start to kind of bring that those wish lists down to more of a prioritization and start to include it into a draft budget that we will take a look at. And so I would suggest that in April or May is the time that staff members would be coming back to the board to ask for special consideration for requests that are in addition of $5,000.
And that will help with October, that everything has been reviewed and discussed, so we don't have what we have been doing, correct?
Correct. You'll still get random, like tonight, we have 2 items before us that are in excess of 5,000 that weren't able to be
Yeah.
received. So you'll get a few of those, but the bulk majority of them will be
Right,
front
but we
loaded.
won't have teachers in here
Correct.
in October.
Correct.
Okay.
So just letting you know, we continue to move forward. We've had some snow days and some missed administrative meetings where we normally would have had some of our preliminary discussions already, but it is a priority for us to start to draft that budget and get our staffing. Number one, a lot of things move around staffing. I would like to see our district continue to look at mental health and wellness. That might include a proposal that would look at a social worker. We know later in the agenda we are going to need to fulfill a director of pupil services and or a school psychologist position. So those are pieces that we'll have to talk about and consider how does that fit into our overall team and planning. We'd like to expand our math intervention beyond the elementary to include more in the middle school, high school, as well as our instructional coaching is predominantly based in the elementary. So those staffing changes have budget dollars that will have to compete and we'll have to prioritize with other needs and emerging changes to schools. And we'll bring back a preliminary draft, obviously, in May and June for the board to react to before we finalize anything, which is still a good 6 months out before October. So again, keeping it in perspective, we've got a half a year to go before we finalize our budget.
I have a question. Are we advertising for a school psychologist on a website? I think I emailed you, Luke, and asked you to investigate that.
Yeah, the district is not.
Okay. Did you look into that?
I did look into it. I am not able to find any information. It's certainly, there's a posting out there for a psychologist, a school psychologist, but it is not attached or
to Minter
affiliated
Point,
anywhere.
and it just says Minter Point on it.
So, and there's no other school affiliation like a private or a charter that we don't own or operate, so that posting is curious. It's interesting. Yeah.
School board convention summary?
It's an opportunity for the members that attended the Wisconsin Association of School Boards to give a quick report of some of the key takeaways from the meeting. And I thought we'd just do a quick roundtable, and if you have any questions, you can certainly ask. Kelly, would you like to start, or do you want to have somebody else start?
Yeah. So, I went, and it was informative and interesting, and I enjoyed it. I talked with a lot of board members from other schools, and that was interesting. There are breakout sessions, and on one afternoon, I wanted to go to 4 of them, so I felt that we were not represented enough at the board, at the convention. It's hard because in that time, I tried to take like 15 minutes of each one. I know I only sat in on one that was, there were a lot about financing and how schools are financing. And what I got out of one was something different than I thought I would, and it was a math lab that they integrated into their new middle school program, and it was grades 6th, 7th, and 8th, and they may have 50 students in a math lab, and they take the students from where they're at. So even if you have a 6th grader, they may still be doing Algebra 1 or Algebra 2, or an 8th grader may be doing calculus. And so they're able to supplement that, and I thought that that was really interesting. So I got the packet of the school that decided to build a whole new middle school, and they have shared spaces with the high school, And they talked about how they're not there at the same time, but if they do ever cross paths, that high school kids essentially ignore 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. They want nothing to do with them. So that was interesting. I enjoyed that. So I brought that for you guys to look at if you want. I saw a speaker. They had a speaker was Rabbi Hutha Singh. I'm sorry if I didn't. And he was just inspirational about how he was educated. So then I went to a lot. Oh, there was one that was interesting. It was telling the story about physical education, and it was interesting because the person giving the presentation talked about how saying that dodgeball is not physical education, and that how students should not have to play a game that is probably not beneficial to their health, and that it's emotional, and that kids can leave playing games that are not really have anything to do with FIED. So I would hope that that doesn't happen in our school. There are other markers that make for good physical education, and my big takeaway from that is dodgeball is not physical education. So I listened to, what was his name, Luke Coons? What was that one speaker's name?
The keynote? Or
The keynote, the
Bill
football
Daggett?
player?
Oh, yes.
They had a Green Bay Packer football player, and he goes around and talks about his history of education and being in sports and how he's educated, and he is one of the only two NFL football players who have a doctorate. So that was interesting. So he talked about how education changed his life, and there's more to life than football. So that was interesting. My favorite was Superintendent of the Year, Pat Greco from Menominee Falls. She was a wonderful speaker when she got her award. She also had, on Friday, Friday's like the day that nobody wants to go to the 8 o'clock one. Well, I couldn't wait to get there. And I went to Improving System Results Through Evidence-Based Leadership. And I found it interesting that finally data was explained through a way that I could understand, and how it held everyone accountable and everyone as leaders. And they have a spring session that you can go and visit their school to see how it's implemented, in the fall one. So I will propose probably in August that we go in September. They fill up fast. It's a 2-day thing. It doesn't cost that much. It's $275, I think, for 2 days. It would be very interesting to see, so we can speak to it. It may be expensive, and that's what you hear first, is that it's expensive, but you can't speak to it unless you understand how it works. And I was really excited about that, and I brought some information on that. People can go on the website and look at that. That's about it. What else? I went to IEPs, I went to how mental health affects people. I think the most rewarding thing was to talk to other board members and see how their schools are doing and how they speak to education. And everyone speaks differently, so that's interesting. What I would say is that for those of you who have never attended, and I'm going to say Larry, that I think if you went up for one day and just walked through the vendor floor and just talked with vendors and see what they're doing, and then you could go home, it would be really beneficial. You could ask all kinds of questions. And I didn't do a vendor floor. I didn't do the vendors a lot. I just went through and tried to gather some information. I got some great information on school furniture, so that, movable and furniture, so I brought that back. I asked the guy if I could take one. He said, take the whole packet. And those people are willing to, of course they want to sell you something, but you're there to also pick their brain too. So even if you don't go to any of the sessions, I think a vendor, just to walk the floor would be great. It'd be, just pretend you're going to a farm show or something.
There's a lot of farmers there. I mean, honestly, the.
Oh,
it's- you
there,
go
they
there and
said,
it's a great-
I mean,
Great
it's,
group of people. to
there
talk to.
were curriculum directors there was, for the bigger schools, and there are bigger schools, director of operations, and they sent him just to walk that vendor floor for one day. They want to know what's new out there, so I would hope that we could send more than one person, at least so that we can split up areas that we're interested in, or at least get more information to bring back. That's my spiel. Thank you. Well, thank the district for sending me. It was well appreciated, and I took a lot from it.
I'll just jump in and just share the sessions I attended. I tried to pick sessions that were embedded with our strategic plan that's upcoming to try to get ahead of it and front load that a little bit. So I attended a session on flexible spaces early morning on Wednesday, then one on closing the achievement gap, and then redefining college and career readiness, which are three of the areas we're working on. Thursday was a systems approach to mindfulness, which is an effort that we like to look at for educating the whole child. And then Friday morning, Joelle and I were actually presenting at that 8:30 morning session. We actually had a really good attendance. I was impressed by the number of people that were interested to know how we were handling school communications. I also saw Bill Daggett, who's one of the keynote speakers, and he was talking about the educational shifts that we need to make for tomorrow's learners. One of his quotes that kind of stuck with me is, we're still budgeting on last year for a generation that's already past us. So we kind of use last year's budget to forecast next year's budget, but we have a generation of kids that are a decade ahead of us in terms of their learning and potential. So we've got to really think about how do we infuse things like robotics and nanotechnology and artificial intelligence and some of these things that are really in the cutting edge of where our culture is going. But we're not really preparing our youth to be ready for that type of a shift. So, interesting to know. Joelle, do you want to add some of your sessions?
Sure, so they have different tracks, as Kelly kind of alluded to. They have like a finance track and all these different tracks, and they always have a community engagement track, so I tend to do a lot of those. I felt good because a lot of the stuff we're already doing, but this session from Elbrook Schools, which is Brookfield, so a wealthier school district and a larger school district, but they had really good tips for to increase community engagement. You know, I mean, I'm just thinking about one thing. They already video, they have candidate form, they video it, so we do that, but like if a person comes in to run for school board, they have them fill out a candidate profile right there in the district office that then they publicize themselves and mail to every district resident. So they really take, you know, just simple, you know, things that we can do. So they were really good. One that wasn't the community engagement track, but I chose to go to, really struck me. It was employing strategies to positively impact employee retention. And, you know, we're a destination district and we have very high achieving staff, but it's like, what can we do with the little things? It's not always about money, but what can we do to keep our staff happy and keep them here and wanting to be here? So that was really interesting, and I'll share some of those tidbits with our school leaders too. As Luke said, I was impressed with our session on Friday morning. I'm still getting requests to follow up with additional info with schools. Like I got one from Park Falls just today, and I had the Tomahawk Superintendent last week in Oregon, and so I mean, I think we really helped people, and not only is it about getting when you go to these, like obviously I get a lot, but I think it's also about giving back too. So yeah, I really enjoy this conference. It's a great way to break up January a little bit, and I like going every year. So. Also, Kelly, you have that book, the cover. So if you look at the bottom, the two kids here on the bottom, one is Bryce Fitzsimons and the other is Jane Dickler, and they are our kids. And I didn't know that for a while until I'm like, yeah, that's my photo. So that was kind of nice, and those were on big posters and everything all over. And so every one of the 2,000 attendees got that.
Special ed, thank you, Joel.
Can we take a break?
Yeah, I think it's more water. Sure.
That's short for the word.
We'll take a break, but I'm okay with it. 5 minutes.
Get outvoted on what? Oh, the rural urban, yeah.
Close.
Yeah, it was close. We had them for a little bit, but just not enough to get it over the hump, which is disappointing, because now we got nothing on the table. You know, so now what?
Yeah, now, that's right.
We go back to doing nothing?
Now we shut this off.
We moved
Of course it doesn't.
Special ed report?
I have some documents for your review on the special education. The board had asked for some numbers, some fiscal response, or for fiscal accountability, and also some academic data. And so just starting with kind of on a high level for the board, just giving you the current status of our special education program. Loaded into the board packet, currently we have 78 students that we are servicing here at Mineral Point at the elementary. 38 of those students are in that particular building. And then I broke it down by disability area so that you have a chance to see how many are speech and language versus orthopedic versus autism versus others. So the current students with multiple needs that need more than one of those that are overlapping, that would be 17 of our students need at the elementary building more than one of those services in conjunction with others. Right now we have 3 evaluations that are in progress, so we could be adding as many as 3 more students at the elementary. The number of students needing one-to-one support, not including our interpreters, is 5, and you'll see that we have 5.5 special education assistants.
Is that one-to-one all day long?
That is pretty much one-to-one all day long, correct. We have a little bit of floating around so that we have, mostly there's a 1 person to 1 student, but sometimes there's a shared situation that's happening.
Do they have an aide to share with 2 or 3 of them?
There could be potentially, while they're servicing a one-to-one need, they're also assisting with other students and their needs.
And is the staffing level in compliance with what's required?
There is, yes. So essentially we have to staff to a level that supports the IEP. And at this time, I'm not aware of any IEP that's not in compliance. So our staffing levels would be therefore meeting and or exceeding.
Are you talking district-wide or just?
I would say district-wide, yes, but I was specifically talking to the elementary building, but yes, that would apply district-wide.
Okay.
At the elementary building, we have 4 special education staff. That's again, not including our interpreters, or we do contract with Upland Hills, for example, for a lot of services, so that's not including those contracted services. We have 4 members, 2 that are full-time special ed teachers, Danielle and Benita, 1.5 speech and language pathologists, and then a half-time early childhood EC. At the middle school, we are servicing 17 students with special education needs, again broke down by disability area and how many of those have concurrent needs. So 2 in that particular case. We have 2 evaluations that are currently in progress, and number of students needing one-to-one support, not including interpreters, is again 2. At the middle school, high school, it's a shared staff, but we have 2.5 people, not including interpreters, contracted services. So 1.5 of those are special ed, and then 1 of those is a district-wide speech and language pathologist. And so the total number of assistants at the elementary that are just dedicated to special education are 4.
There's another name, Luke, like autism. What's the name of it? It's close to that. We don't have any of that.
Tourette's maybe, or
Asperger's?
Asperger's?
We don't have any of those.
I couldn't speak to specifically if any students are diagnosed with Asperger's or not. At the high school, total number of students with special education needs 23, broken down by disability areas. 4 students with multiple services needed. No current evaluations in progress. 1 student that is in need of one-on-one support. We have 3 case managers at the high school, 1 that's special education, 1 that's working with our options program, and then we have a half-time position that is kind of that floating district-wide position. It's Janice Needham is half-time, kind of middle school, high school, so she fills in at that particular role. So a total of 3.5 special education assistants servicing the high school. That kind of gives you a breakdown of just our staff and the ratios and or the different types of disabilities that we're working with. I can go further in depth. I just wanted to give you a quick overview. Any questions there?
I guess, like Lisa asked, I just want to make sure that we're compliant with who's supposed to be with who and what they're supposed to be doing. And
Yeah, I am not aware of any IP that is not in compliance, which means that they're all in compliance at this point in time.
Has there been any pursuit of a family liaison, having some ongoing support in that regard?
We discussed it at our policy committee the last time around. I did reach out to the CISA 3 representative to try to get more information about the liaison, and I have not heard back from that person yet. But we do have, some things that we're working and then looking to roll in some of that discussion along with some of our strategic planning and trying to set something up for a longer term plan to look at a liaison or an engagement coordinator of some sort.
through CISA.
CISA 3 offers the service. They have a...
Is that the one I was asking about training for and I couldn't get because I wasn't a family member?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's also the same, Bobby Jo is here, she had mentioned it a couple meetings ago about possibly looking into this person.
Caroline Lawson, is that who we're talking about? So how do we keep this on the agenda to follow up to see what the next step will be?
It's part of what we're looking at as a district. We don't really have specific next steps. We're definitely keeping this as part of our long-term strategic plan, which is around engaging our community and creating community partnerships. So there's no plan at this point, but it's still something that we're definitely having on our radar.
Could it be put in with the hires that you're talking about?
It's a service you'd contract for with CISA 3. It's not really somebody you hire.
Okay. So
And
do we
they're-
have, could it be put under contractual services? Because we have a lot of those, correct?
It could be, yeah. And the CISA 3 contract renews annually, and so that's a service we could contract for.
But we've already contracted for this year's.
We have, and they could look at doing a partial contract, but we didn't budget for that. So we'd be looking at this more as a long-term strategic plan.
So 2019.
18-19 school year.
So what can we do for this year for families that, may need some help navigating through the system?
We had talked at the policy meeting about looking at the website and trying to enhance some of that engagement opportunity, to maybe have a frequently asked questions section or to have more of the DPI data kind of screenshot and brought into our own website so they don't have to navigate all the information out there, some short-term wins to try to just be more vibrant. We're also going to be under new leadership in the near future, so we also want to bring whatever we do in underneath the vision of the new person that's going to be carrying this department forward. So we're kind of in a position where we are transitioning, so it's going to be really hard to give a short-term, long-term plan as we're ramping down on one end and trying to gear up on another.
I think the drop down on the webpage would work the best to help parents. I mentioned that before, to look at a couple of schools that I looked at to see how they address that issue. The language may not have been correct, but the idea was to look to see how other schools do that. So that's where a parent can go to and just drop down on special education, and they have nice maps and nice visuals, just how we would do for a graph, like the graph that we did.
Could we have just a contact person in the school so that any parent could contact somebody here, to help them answer any questions they might have in this regard?
Yeah, I think the best person currently is Dixie Dempsey, is our Director of People Services. Would be somebody you could contact and get information about the IEP process, or specifically about education, special education rule, DPI rule, law. Fantastic resource that we have available to us.
What about, is PEP still, is that still in existence? Is that still functioning, the PEP group?
I don't
I haven't heard much about
I have not had any interactions with PEP in probably 6 months. I think they're still doing script, and I think they're still a functioning unit, but as a parent organization, I don't think that structure has evolved. I know it's still a work in progress.
Because there was some suggestion of having like a PTA, but devoted to special ed, the special ed PTA. The other schools have done something like that, and it seems like that could be beneficial.
Yeah. If there's a parent group that would like to organize underneath that umbrella, we would certainly partner with any parent-teacher group that wants to get together, or parent school group.
Yeah, I think that could be very helpful.
I like that idea.
Sharing some financial data with the group, and I'll kind of share a little bit about, this is our 5 site, which is part of our Forecast 5 project. All of this data comes from the budgets and annual reports that schools have to report to DPI, so this is downloaded from their database. I have created inside of here, you can data mine this in a lot of different ways, but I've created some peer groups. And the one I use most often is schools that have similar size and enrollment, schools that have low-income students, similar in percentage-wise, roughly about 30%. Similar populations of English language learners, less than 1% in our case. And we have very little ethnicity in our building for the most part. So I look at schools that are similar in mineral point status across the state. And as this has got to refresh, it kind of timed out here, so give me a little bit of a moment here.
And food service
Yeah,
too, and
it
not
looks like it's
special ed.
just food service.
We'll get there as well too.
Okay.
And it kind of kicks back to. May need a total refresh, go in and go out. It doesn't look like it's going to allow me to come back in here. So we'll just load it back up again. So to your point, we can look at all the different CISA regions. We're obviously going to spend our time in special education today, which is going to drop down that menu. If I pull in our income, ELL, ethnicity peers, what you'll find are Auburndale, Cambridge, Edgar, Mineral Point, Mishicot, Oakfield, Rosholt, Spring Valley are our comparables. You can pull this down and look at our CISA 3 comparables. We can do this in a lot of different ways. But as we look at all years of data, I'm just going to kind of get it down to last year's data, which is the 2017-18 school year, because we're in, 16-17 school year, because 17-18 budget hasn't been finalized. We don't have actuals yet. But as we look at the different schools that would be comparable to our size and our demographics, we can start to get into some of this data a little bit further. And what you have is actual expenses and revenues for each. So let's just look at Auburndale. As you pull up Auburndale, you'll look to see that in 2017, their district enrollment was 834 students. Their actual revenue was $312,000. Their actual expenses were $798,000 for a difference of $486,000. So you get a sense of the green being revenue and the orange being expenditures. What you have is the difference between the two is what you often see in Fund 10 is that intergovernmental transfer from Fund 10 to Fund 27. Because you only get so much finite amount of revenue that your expenditures then have to be offset by your operational budget. So that's where you'll see that transfer annually. We actually transfer the full amount, which is not the difference. It's revenues in one side of our student management system and expenditures on the other. So you'll see a full expenditure of like 1.1 million. Even though if you look here last year, the difference was 1.2 million was last year's what we transferred from our operational budget into our special education budget. But out of that, we received $416,000 in revenue. So we had an offset or a shortfall of $854,000. Go ahead.
So the revenue is from Medicaid, state aid, all of those things?
Yeah, in fact, if you look up here, the revenue sources are from all of these different revenue sources. Each one of them attaches to either a state, a federal, or a Medicaid account.
And attached to a student?
Yes. Well, not necessarily, like 127 is not a student. It would be probably salary, and 200s would probably be benefits, and 300s would be contracted services.
Okay.
And all the revenues that come in associated with that.
Do you have other funds that support special ed then? I mean, you must.
No, not really, because special education, unless there's incidental benefit, which means that you are servicing in a regular ed classroom and there's a benefit that also gets applied to special education, but by design and by the way the funding system works, the woofer is what it's called, then DPI is you have to keep those funds totally segregated because you have what's called maintenance of effort, which shows that the money that you're receiving from the federal government is truly being spent only on special education needs and not being consumed in the general education department. So it's very tight reporting that needs to be done in order to show exactly how those revenues were expensed and truly for only needs that revolve around special education.
And those are examined when we get audited, is that correct?
Correct, that's part of our audit process annually.
So if someone were to have a question about this and ask where is money going, you could show them.
Correct. This is an example of where our revenues come in. This is what we report up to the Department of Public Instruction. This is what gets audited. This is the revenue we get in. These are the expenditures that we made. And we have to show DPI annually that those expenditures truly are in the world of special education and not regular ed. I think the misnomer is that we're sitting on a cash reserve and we're not spending down all of our extra dollars. Well, we do hold back some reserve because we can carry it over, but it's not because we have it and we just don't know what to spend it on. It's that because we have so much expenditure, we have to be very calculated, not just to use up the little revenue that we do have, to make sure we're very calculated to get the most needy services and or the services we can't anticipate yet. One high-need student moves into the district and we are really upside down in a hurry if we've allocated all of our expenditures.
So I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So how much do you have in that revenue, that extra revenue, or not, but that pocket of revenue that you keep?
How much is currently in carryover right now?
Yeah, carryover.
I don't know offhand.
Okay.
But comparatively speaking, it's minimal compared to
Okay.
obviously the revenue we have.
Okay.
But there is some amount that's carried over, and
And I'm not asking to be
No.
suspicious, this is my first budget,
Yep.
so I'm trying to
and I'm not trying to hide
understand.
any numbers. I can
Yep.
get that for you and share it out.
Yep.
It's, I'm gonna, if I set a number, again, it gets held to, but I'm gonna say it's roughly about $100,000.
Yeah,
So it's not like we're pocketing millions of dollars here in special ed revenue that we just aren't expending.
So what is Edgar doing?
So Edgar, my guess is that in this particular case, they're contracting for services potentially, or they're not reporting it correctly. I don't know their story, but I would be suspicious. A school of 617 kids, and they receive $265,000 in revenue for special education, but only spend 10. Yeah, I couldn't speak to what that is.
like someone should be looking at that.
Somebody should be looking at that. I would have concern about that,
And
but I'm not here to.
Rockville,
Edgar's a nice town. I've been there often. Good people. I just don't know. And again, sometimes this is a function of they don't use the proper reporting codes.
yes.
And so when they get reported up, it's usually that gets audited itself and they've got to clean up those codes so that you don't get this kind of data. But maybe their expenditures aren't being put correctly into their Fund 27. And so that's why you're not seeing any expenditures.
I would like to see that number that you just said. You're estimating it to be 100,000 that's in
The actual,
reserves,
yeah.
because that would be a quarter of the expenses. And to me, that seems like a lot to be holding in reserve.
I knew I shouldn't have said anything, but I'll give you the number. You know, it is what it is, and it's not.
Expenses.
I mean, not expenses, of the revenue.
Oh, okay.
400,000 in revenue.
The
Sorry.
$854 there, do we pay all of that out of the district? Or do we get some revenue from the government?
416.
We get 416 in revenue sources, and we pay out 1.2 in actual special ed expenditures.
Nobody helps pick that up?
Nope, that's part of our state aid, and our operational levy has to pick up, the taxes and so forth. I can spin this one other
Which is
way.
right? I mean, it's like 26 cents on the dollar. I mean, that's the sort of
27 cents
spitball
on the dollar is what
Yeah.
flows through
that we talk about.
to
For
reimburse.
special ed,
Right,
26
26, right,
Okay,
that
got
we
it.
get reimbursed.
So,
That we get reimbursed.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So here's another spin of it that just looks at, this is Iowa County and those schools that are contiguous around us. You can kind of see how we tease out. Dodgeville's a very different school district. I wouldn't necessarily use it as a comparable. as their district services 1,200 kids, and that's, we're not that. So obviously, you're gonna have more expenditures that go along with their special education program. Yep.
Can you do a per pupil?
You could divide it out. I mean, just take the total number of expenditures revenues and divide by 1271.
Can you divide it by the number of kids that are in special ed?
I don't have that number teased out. I don't know how to do that. So I don't know how many students Dodgeville would be servicing. I'll give you a different report just to kind of see some things a different way. This is revenue versus expenditures comparison. Again, our comparable school districts on the left. If we look at just Edgar, for example, here it's showing, again, the 600.
Active food service.
Thank you. There we go. So again, Edgar and it looks like Rochelle might be some anomalies, so I'm going to spend some time. Let's look at Oakfield, a population of 548 kids. Here is the per student revenue of 191. Now, is that per student of just kids in special education or their entire population? I would have to look at the source for that DPI report to know.
You could look at us probably and figure it out.
Yep, good point. So 713 says district
Total
enrollment, even says district enrollment, but revenue per student. So you take you gotta get the total, so I don't know. I can look into that and find out. It would be nice to say revenue per special education student.
That's gotta be per student.
I mean, that's the
850,000
entire-
with 70-some special ed students.
Yeah. So on average, we get $584 in revenue per student. We spend $1,783 for a difference of $1,199. So that's kind of negative in the backwards way. It's hard to believe that there are districts that would actually receive 191, expend 695, so that's a difference of 504. The average here is 536 over those schools. So you can kind of do a comparison of where you're at compared to where other school districts are at. You can infer your own takeaways from this, but I think between the two graphs, I would say that our expenditures in special education are near or at the top of our comparable group as compared to other districts. So when there's discussions around you don't spend as much as you possibly should or could on special education, our comparison would show that we're not only spending more than the average, we're probably spending more than our peer groups and more than or equal to districts that are much larger than us. So moving along, this is again an accountability breakdown. I hope this is still live, but I may have to refresh. Let's see what this does. Okay. So this is not, these are just the A's. I'm going to try to pull up a different peer group, and I'll go back to our across the state peers. So this allows you to look at then, not just from a fiscal sense, but how are you doing academically for the dollars that you spend. Student achievement, again, is across the entire district. You can't tease out just special education, but there are some pieces that I think are helpful to understand. So as we look at our peers, I'm going to move from student achievement to student growth, which is one thing that you would measure when you look at all students and their possible growth. What this looks at is specifically where kids are compared to kids of similar growth. In other words, comparing our low-performing kids to other low-performing kids across the state, comparing our high-performing kids with other high-performing kids across the state, and looking at those two growths compared to the state average. And what this would suggest is out of a possible total of 50 points, Mineral Point scored a 49.2 in the growth out of 50 for math, and a 45.4 out of 50 for language arts. That's again all kids across all areas, comparing them to their cohort group, and then comparing that growth to the state average. So we are growing more than the state average for what we would suggest a kid in that particular demographic would grow for. Moving down that demographic, this is one that I think shares a little bit more data around special education because it looks at closing gaps. And basically, we have two gaps. We have a poverty gap and we have a special education gap. We don't really have an ethnicity or a language gap to speak of because the numbers are so small. So this again doesn't tease out which kids are poverty and which kids are special education, but it is the closing gaps scores are reflecting those two populations. And again, in our cohort, only Oakfield is similar in closing gaps at a similar rate, 45 and 42 versus our 46 and 43 of a possible.
How many students do they have?
Oakfield has, I'll have to go to the other.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah,
They're by Stevens Point.
correct.
Okay.
You can do that again, you know, if you
Yep.
go to Iowa County and those that are around us and look at growth, it paints a different picture when you look at other comparables. So I think the two generalizations one might make is that, and it's hard because this doesn't tease out, the reason it doesn't tease out specifically special education is it could potentially identify students when we get down to that level of data desegregation, and we're looking at the number of kids in elementary versus middle versus high. It really gets to be a little bit compromising of what we're trying to do here. But on a high level, one might take away that we are expending more money in special education than the average school district. But I would also then suggest that we're also outperforming students in similar areas of where special education is measured. So then the cost analysis comes into effect. Is the extra money we're putting into special education and other resources translating to academic achievement in a way that the district feels comfortable, or they need to get into further detail about that?
We had a discussion at one time, but I don't think we followed through on it, about grading special ed students. Is that something that we could get on the agenda? You know, not just a pass, fail, or...
I think we've been handling that on a case-by-case basis through the IEP process. So I'm not sure we would put a blanket rule in.
on it? Okay. Is anyone in special education getting a grade?
I believe we are now, yes.
The vast majority of students in special education are getting grades.
Right.
So I'm just close up, Taz. If you want to see anything further, let me know. But I just thought I would share some of that as well. Anything else you'd like to know more about with the special education program? Okay, certainly let me know. I've got one, the carryover available. I'll bring that back to the board. You'll get that report from me.
Can we talk about policy 365 at this point? Can we just move that up? I think one of the changes that we had talked about in the committee meeting didn't make it. And that's under A. I thought that in the general education class was going to go away, and instead it was going to say to all students.
I had moved to all students at the end. It used to be up in the front.
You have to all students
Yeah,
under A, don't you?
It was there. Oh, you moved it to the end.
Yeah.
But I thought we were going to take out in the general education class.
Whichever you choose. My notes reflected that you wanted to move to all students at the end, and
I
that
think
was
we went around about it a couple times, Amy, do you remember?
I think her intent was to move it to the end of that statement. I qualified personnel to all students. And not the end of
the paragraph. So you want to put it in here?
That's just what I thought.
Or you want to take out general education?
I thought that's what we had discussed.
Yeah, I remember we were gonna just.
So if general education is in there, is that a separation?
I think it's been perceived as a separation, and it's not a reflection of what actually happens. And it seemed like that was going to
Because it used to say, provided to all students in the general education
Right.
class by qualified. So we had the discussion that all means all and that it means all.
Right.
But you wanted to move it to keep the general education there by qualified personnel to all students. So that it's clear that all means all, and that all does not mean all students in the general education class.
Okay, provided in the general education class. Okay.
That's what I recall. Is that we didn't really discuss taking general education out. but that it read provided to all students.
So, Lisa, what were
So
you
that
thinking
it was
instead of general
misinterpreted.
education? Because I think I understand what you're concerned about.
Well, I mean, why do we need it to say in the general education class? If there's a perception that that is not applying to kids in special ed, and if the reality is that it does apply to kids in special ed, why keep it?
Should we hold off on that and see what other schools have written?
The thing is, I thought we all decided this, that we
I don't
to take it
remember
out.
removing general education.
Yeah, I had two, the other thing was in B, it said screening shall be provided. It used to say to all students in the class, and we took out in the class.
I remember conversation about general education class, but I don't recall exactly how we left it, but I do remember this conversation. And that,
Well, I mean, why don't we just back up? I mean, is the intent, why is it in there?
Because this line here, and going back to the RTI process, the RTI process is a process that provides services to kids that help them to be referred to special education or special education services. So you can't just refer kids anymore. You have to have research-based, evidence-based interventions that have proven not to work. And this is the system that deploys that prior to being able to make the referral. If that hasn't been tried, that's the first step. You can't even make the referral. So to that point, you have to then have a scientific research-based intervention in the general education class, and it's got to be shown to be not effective in order for you to go to the next step of that process. So if you take out the in the general education class and you're assuming that that implies it could be general education or special education, then that's not responding to intervention to qualify a kid for special education. So I think there might be confusion around what even RTI is. I'm not sure.
Is there laws that should be attached to this?
There is not really law. There's DPI rule. There's different models for response to intervention. And that RTI is kind of a lost acronym now. It's more MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. It's kind of what everything's already migrated to.
So, but under policy, it's still response to intervention.
Yes.
But we all still call it that. Are the special ed kids getting, are they having RTI? At the end of the day, what's going on with the special ed kids?
So once you have qualified for special education, now your IEP kicks in, and that's the strategies that are being deployed as that multi-tiered system of support. So that would trump an RTI process in some ways, that if the kid needs to have these types of accommodations or modifications, then that would supersede the RTI process. Some kids are getting exclusive pullouts during that time. Some kids are also being involved in the RTI process. It's really an individualized educational plan. So you can't just say it's one way or the other, but this would be the process to determine if an IEP is appropriate, and if it is, then those services become basically your tier 3 strategy.
Once a kid has been identified as being in special ed, then during that segregated time at the end of the day that we all call RTI, are they getting the benefit of scientific research-based instruction in reading and math?
In some cases, yes, and in some cases, if their IEP says that's not what they need this, then it's something else.
So, my question is,
It's not one size fits all.
so, this is what I learned when I listened to the evidence-based discussion, was that through that, every 15 days, a student can be monitored, not only in special ed, but in general ed, and they can see who needs intervention. So we could also monitor that through special ed too. So if the marker is, I'm just gonna say number, okay? markers 10, and you have a special ed student that may be at 8, then, and that one's at 3, and they have the same IEP in a certain instance, that you would really, go into that 3, and then, because you know that with the, not as much help, so you can, what you can do is you can just focus in on students right away. You know what I mean? Like any student right away. And then, not only that, but it helps parents and the teachers and the students all know where they're at and where they need help.
And that is part of our process, we call that progress monitoring, and that happens embedded inside of both the RTI process if a student potentially could qualify for special education, as well as for those that are in special education to learn if the interventions being deployed are working or not. If they're not working, you don't want to wait a quarter to figure that out. We're constantly evaluating that and then changing the strategies when we aren't seeing growth.
By leaving the language in the general education class, is this policy in compliance with what DPI recommends with regard to RTI?
I believe it is.
Did this come from the policy resource guide from?
The Wisconsin Association of School Boards, correct.
From way back when?
They don't even
Right now,
suggest
they
one
don't.
anymore,
Yeah,
correct?
they,
Oh, this is not current?
Well,
Oh,
they don't
This is our
suggest,
current
this is our current
oh,
policy.
this is our, okay, got
They
it.
don't suggest policy at all.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
and that would be my recommendation. The policy committee and I talked about that, and we decided to leave the policy as is. But because the Association of School Boards doesn't believe this is a policy that should be used as a sample any longer, at some point we might want to revisit whether that continues to be the policy, but for now, trying to work within this framework to make it work for our students as
Well,
it is.
And is part of it then because RTI is not a term that's being used anymore?
It's shifted significantly already, yeah.
So we should, but this still should be attached to a DPI thing so people understand where it's coming from, right?
I suppose it could be. DPI is kind of broken off into the Wisconsin RTI Center, which is kind of the hub for RTI accreditation. And so I'm not quite sure what rule I would link it back to specifically.
Here's what, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
At our policy meeting, I remember talking about in the general education class, and I thought you explained, that includes everybody. That includes a special ed, too. And so then we're like, well, then let's get rid of it, that qualifier, because there's a perception that you are treating the special ed kids, that they're not getting an advantage of this. So I'm confused and concerned. I would like that language to be gone. I think that is what we talked about at our meeting.
That's fine. If that's what the board wants, we'll strike it. I did not have that in my notes. I just had moving to all students at the end of the sentence. But that's fine. If you want to take it out, we'll just take it out.
In my notes it was, and it used to say all students in the general education class. So it would be provided to all students and then take out in the general education class.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
Well,
Is it close to the same?
do you look at what any other schools are writing?
I have not looked at other schools' RTI policies.
It's a perception issue.
Okay, I just asked a question.
So strike
Anybody else? Oh, Ann.
I feel like I remember us talking about removing that. I wish I wasn't thinking about my notes or something.
Let's just make it the way we want to make it.
Do you have any problem with it, Julie?
DPI doesn't.
No, I don't have any problem with
Why
it.
do we even leave it?
We specifically had this in the policy.
DPI, you said that DPI RTI doesn't even recommend this policy anymore.
I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean,
WASB does not provide it as a sample policy anymore.
I,
That would be
to
accurate.
me, yes, WASB doesn't provide it as a sample. They don't, I mean, you were gonna look into why that was, did you?
I didn't because you said for purposes of
Right,
health and
exactly.
longevity, we just leave it in, so I
Yes.
didn't explore that more. It will not change our practice in any way, shape, or form, so
Right.
whatever the language wants to be. is
Okay,
fine.
perfect.
So I see strike general education class.
And put in to all students.
At the end of by qualified personnel to all students.
Provided, mathematics provided to all students, and take out in the general education class.
I would guess when this was written, that was important, because that's the start of the RTI process, is that it's in the general education classroom, and that has to happen before RTI, which has to happen before referral to special ed. So I think it's just describing the process in order. I'm not saying we have to leave it, I'm just saying I think that's the intent of why it says general ed. It's not excluding special ed, this is the process prior to referral to special ed.
So can we pass this tonight with that?
I believe the board can.
Okay.
Make an amendment. If you want to, if you feel like it substantively changes it, you can certainly bring it back next month, but if you're feeling comfortable with that, I consider it an editorial revision. It doesn't really change the content in my mind. I mean,
Because all students were getting the benefit of RTI.
correct.
Okay. And that's how I understood it too. So I agree that in my mind it was an editorial change. All right, I move that we approve policy 365 as it will be amended.
Striking general education. Put in,
Striking in the general education class.
okay, is everybody clear?
And just so you know, there's one other change too in B. It used to say in the class, and now it says to all students. So we would be approving two changes to this policy.
And it's correct how it's stated there.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay.
That's what we had agreed to in the policy meeting.
All right, is there a second?
I'll say it.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Anybody opposed? And motion carried. All right, you want to stay on policies or head back up to the detached parcels?
I think this time would be probably, the board chooses. Your
It's
agenda.
up to
Your
you.
agenda.
All right.
I don't care.
Let's stay on policies. We're done. Okay, let's go back up to the 200 series. What's your wish on that?
223, I thought at the policy committee meeting, we talked about that there would be a budget that would go along with professional development plan, and that you would present a budget to the school board to approve. And I didn't see that in here. So I would work with you to revise 223. And the rule on 223, I found to be, and this isn't a change, but this was in the sample, there's a part where a school board president can just by himself or herself approve professional development activity. And I thought that was potentially problematic too, so I would change that. Just 223.
The second one?
The second one being the rule. See up in the right-hand corner, it says rule.
Yep. So, if we're gonna put a number to this, is it gonna be per activity, per teacher, per what? How are you gonna put a number to this?
He was good, the superintendent would prepare an annual plan and a budget around it. And it would be sort of like the technology budget. It would come to the board and we would approve it in one lump sum. Or, discuss it and review it and at a meeting. Approve it.
that feasible with travel and, I mean, conferences that, I just, is that gonna be easy to get to? We'll just forecast based on, you know, the prior year, most likely?
It's probably in conflict with the district administrator's contract, so those two will have to be reconciled at some point, because you have a contract that says that you shall be every other year allowed or entitled to a national conference or travel. And then this policy somewhat states that it's at the board's prerogative and can approve or not approve, so those two will have to be reconciled at some point.
So, 223 is for all staff, and 223, the rule, is for district administrator. And you want a number attached to the rule?
No,
to
to
the
the
policy.
policy.
So that number, but that number could change year by year.
Yes.
So then the policy has to be changed year by year.
No,
No, just include.
The policy shows that he's going to, like, the policy would have when he's going to provide us with a certain number. The number would be
Okay,
in the
the
policy.
timeline,
It
it's
would
gonna be a
when-
timeline. Okay,
Right, the
got it.
action required by the superintendent.
Okay. So we'd have that in March, right?
When you say have that, what's that?
The number.
Policy coming back or
No, the number.
the number?
There should be a date in there then too, right?
You tell me the number and you tell me the date, we'll put it in the
what do you
policy.
mean a number?
A date. Well, you're putting a budget in there, right?
Not a dollar
Exact
number,
number.
no. It's just making a policy that he would present the board annually with a plan and a budget around
Around that,
this
okay.
item.
I don't like including the rule,
You don't like,
including the rule, because it's in direct conflict with a signed contract.
all right,
Because it just applies to
the
the,
superintendent.
yeah.
Okay, I think it's worth,
No, because those are in the other administrators' contracts.
But the
too.
rule only applies to the district administrator.
What I'm saying is, when do you present that budget thing?
You know what I'm saying?
That should be
So why doesn't it apply there?
noted then too.
Yeah,
Does
it's
that
just-
make sense?
It does, yeah.
Do we have
The
policy?
board tells me when you want me to present it, so it can be put into this policy.
Into the main one?
Budget development policy,
No, no,
yeah, it could be
I mean,
either
the
one.
policy,
is there,
It's
when,
too
what
tricky.
makes sense to you, do you think, in the budget
but the
timeline?
rule only applies to the administrator.
You know,
Well, when we start asking the
April?
questions,
April, March?
some of the, yeah, I mean,
When do we get the technology budget?
it's been as early as January and as late as March,
So is that coming next month?
most likely. We had a meeting scheduled this month, so if that kind of gets scheduled, but I'm not sure I would, this is again, because there's so many moving parts this year, I'm not sure I would approve the technology budget so early. I would wait until I know some other things around staffing before I would lock down on what our technology budget is.
These pre-budget, these sub-budgets, whatever you want to call them,
Mhm.
I mean, it makes sense for them to be approved before before the May meeting, right?
no.
When we do that, though, it locks in certain numbers, and then you are working with the remaining balance to try to get everything else put together.
Okay.
That strategy has worked, but there's some competing interests this year that are kind of unique, so I'm not sure I would get so early in that process to lock down technology until I know staffing. We've invested pretty heavily in technology. I know we're maybe a little off the agenda here, but that may not need to be as solid. It could be a little more flexible this year.
Well, maybe you could make a recommendation when would be a good, and we could put it in the policy as to when it would be that you would present the board annually with that.
Yeah. I would turn it back to the board whenever you want. I would share with you what I knew at that time. But, your professional development for next year, a lot of these opportunities don't even present themselves until much later.
I think May.
And if you have to compare and contrast the
April or May.
SCD with the National Superintendent's Roundtable with a trip to Cupertino to visit Apple, I don't know if any of those would material, and when they materialize, the prioritization of those, the budget for that.
And would it depend on the calendar too, as to how many professional development days are needed by each teacher?
And when it's offered, and can you even go?
If they can go, if it's a summertime activity, and
How
where it's
about-
at.
Is June reasonable? Lou?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, it's-
what I don't want to happen is that all those little micro budgets get approved and then we get this other number here. I mean,
Currently, the process is working fine in that, in any given other year, every other year is the contractual language. We would put in a budget for a general expense for travel. We know what
Yeah.
a rough conference
Yep.
fee is, what rough travel is, what rough lodging is.
so when do we get that, the general budget?
That's built into the general budget in the May to June
Okay.
preliminary budget.
All right.
Yeah, so we're talking about the same time frame.
All right, so 223 and whether we go with the rule has been tabled,
Okay.
so more or less. So I move that we approve 224, 224 the rule, 253.2, 253.3, 254, and 260.
What aren't we
No, I
approving?
want
Just
to, I want to
223,
discuss
the rule?
224. I think we have some questions on
Okay, there is a motion on the table. I was going to ask for a second.
All right, go ahead.
Discussion. Is there a second to Lisa's motion?
I'll second.
Second. Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
that. So the first one was what was there, right? Or is it no one? There's two 224s, correct?
One
One's
is
the
the
rule,
policy,
one's the
one's a
policy.
rule.
Do we always have rules?
No. And, well,
Not
yes.
everyone has.
Yes, there's always been a smattering of rules. And the idea with rules is that they provide more detail.
You get the definition almost.
That's a word. Yeah.
Close.
So did you have a question?
This 200 series came out of the policy meeting. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we vote on these things?
Sure.
So,
Okay,
go ahead.
but the motion on the table is for all of them, except for 223
And it's rule.
and its rule.
And I want to make a motion that 224 separate?
Well, we have a motion on the floor to approve all but 223 and 223 rule. So we need to make a change.
Lisa can change it if she'd like. You want-
I'll withdraw my motion.
Okay, so the motion.
We just do the
Okay.
All right, I move that we approve 224, the policy. Board Administrative Relations.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it. So that's the third link we're all looking at to have questions on, right?
Yeah.
So you have a motion and a second. Is this one you had a question on, 224?
I'm just going to vote. I'm going to ask you a question, I'm just going to vote. So just, let's vote on 224.
Any other
Let's just do them
discussion?
singly.
On 224? You support 224 as it is, Luke?
Yes.
Okay.
Is this the one we're talking about where you can't vote by phone or something?
No,
That's different, okay. That right there.
I'd like to hear your question. Kelly.
Well, I find the last paragraph this is what I see that, this is what I had happen, is that questions have been made during a board meeting and I've gotten kind of blown off or discounted or whatever. And then if I've done some investigation and it was, you know, I kind of got slapped down on that. But I made an attempt to ask for information and I've not received it. So I'm going to investigate. And I don't know how many times I mean, if I feel that it's my duty, or if I'm going to protect the school in a matter, I'm going to investigate. And I think I've saved the school district probably from, you know, getting sued on some things because I investigated. So I find that kind of murky. It's like we don't have any, you know, it's just we're supposed to accept what someone says and that's it.
So I mean, can I just, I don't think that, I don't read it as that we're supposed to accept anything. I mean, if there's questions or concerns in terms of the board getting the information it needs from administrators or personnel, I think, as I'm reading it, the difference would be rather than investigating this certain subject matter on your own individually, it would be that collectively as a board, we would say, we need more information, or we require whoever is not, or withholding that information, we require that person to provide it, and then we hold them accountable for that, versus 7 of us doing our own investigation.
I
So I think
understand
that's
that.
what.
And I tried to get some garner some support through that. And I didn't get it.
When you say you tried to get support, I mean, did you come to the board and try to get
So
something passed?
I want to, no, it wasn't that. It was a different matter. So without saying what it is, and it's all done now, so so tell me how we should proceed then. If we do not get something answered that we want, so how does it get answered then? How do I bring it to the board, or one of us bring it to the board so we can get an answer?
The board president is our liaison between the 7 of us and the superintendent.
And try to get something on the agenda if you think it's appropriate. And then if the board takes action, the board can make a decision that something be investigated. An individual board member has no authority to do that.
Well,
At this late hour, should we table the rest of these policies until the future?
Won't take long to clear them, will it?
I mean, I just don't want to go through it and
Yeah.
rush through it, pass them on. If there's questions, then we have questions.
Okay. However, these policies have been on the agenda for like the last 3
the
months.
2, we can do the 2s.
And we had a policy committee meeting about it. So can we do them as a group?
Yes.
I reinstate my motion.
To approve them all?
Yep. Except for 223 in the rule.
Hopefully I don't compromise these.
Okay. You're okay with that second then, Julie? Approve them all?
I would like
That
to
was the
second
original.
the third
Just hold.
motion that we said.
Did we withdraw the second motion?
I think we said we did.
I'll withdraw my second motion to just approve 224. Okay.
So we're doing them all.
Doing them all except for 223.
And just all in the 200s, the 224, 224 rule, 253.2, 253.3, 54, and 26.
Julie?
The answer is a firm yes.
You're
on that.
seconding it?
I thought I already did.
Oh,
No,
I
sorry.
thought, she thought we were voting.
I thought we were
Oh,
getting to it
I'm
then.
sorry. No, I just
We
wanted to
will,
make for certain you
we'll
were
call
the
it.
one.
Yes, I
Any other
said,
discussion? All in favor of all these policies except for 223 and 223 the rule? If you're in favor, say aye.
yes.
Anybody opposed? Motion carried.
What do we got next? Townspeople?
We gotta go back down. The parcels from Mineral School District.
hope this is still live. But this is the
Counties have literally changed since we've been here. Tectonica's merged with our math.
Tectonic shift.
Off of Iowa County's information system. And what we have is a conversation started a year ago with Iowa Grant, Dodgeville, and Pecatonica, and it was really informal, but annually DPI reminds schools that if there's properties that wish to attach or detach, they can do so, and there's a timeline for that. What I learned this year is schools can also initiate the timeline. It doesn't necessarily have to be initiated by properties. So I worked with Jill Underly, the superintendent at Pecatonica, to just look at our borders, and we had an agreement that before we even look at the map, if we have any of those islands that are just out there in the middle of nowhere, let's just clean them up. It's not about a power grab or a student swap. Let's just simply clean up our borders so that we don't have buses traveling across somebody else's property to pick up our kids and vice versa. That led into an informal conversation with Iowa Grant and Dodgeville, but we have decided to table the counterparts to our north and northwest or west until next year. They need more time to kind of process the whole piece, but Pecatonica was willing to continue to move forward. You see this little island in light green over here that's in Pecatonica school attendance boundary, that is Mineral Point School District attendance boundary. So as we start to dig into this a little bit more, we can get right into the actual properties, the size of the properties, who owns the properties, and we have shared, whoops, sorry gang, let me back up just a little bit.
This is a really cool website,
Learned a lot here.
GIS stuff.
Yeah, so GIS, you can click on the property, it pulls up the name of the person, the type of property and so forth. Basically, these properties are owned by 3 different people or families or residences or state trusts or other entities, and we have notified all 3 that it is the district's recommendation and that they detach from Mineral Point and attach to Pecatonica. Pecatonica is also going through a similar process where they are going through a resolution to say we wish to attach these properties to the Pecatonica School District. So a detach and an attach would allow that attendance line to clean up. It should be noted that this island that's in the middle of Pecatonica does not have any students attached to it, so it does not impact state funding formula for purposes of students that we're receiving funding for now would now go to Pecatonica. That's just not the case. It does have assessed value in property. It's fairly minimal in the big scheme of things when we talk about school finance. So it would be my recommendation to the board to detach this island of land and attach it to the Pecatonica School District. You have 3 resolutions there. You could do it as a consent agenda and approve all 3, and then we would just get 3 signatures, or you could choose 1 or 2 of these properties and not the 3rd.
So all 3 are in that island?
Yes.
Okay.
And all 3 were notified that they could come to this meeting and speak to the issue if they so chose, and we received no calls, no emails, or
Correspondence.
What is the financial implication of the map?
There's one property for 23.66 acres, assessed value $2,100 total. The other landowner has 159.18 acres for an assessed value of $204,200. The third landowner has 70 acres for an assessed value of $168,800.
Mill rate is
our current mill rate,
current mill rate, just
like 11.46. I'm going from memory, I don't know.
Close.
12 something.
I thought it was 1211 or something, but maybe it's not that high.
That's 12 per 100,000.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's pretty.
Pretty.
All right, so we have a motion to accept the recommendation for this transfer.
I motion
Motion by Kelly. Do we have a second?
to accept
I'll
the
second.
transfer.
Second by Leg-Dalton.
Oh, they'll have to sign off on it.
They have to have a
They've
board
been-
meeting as well.
Oh.
Pecatonica has to have a board meeting
Yep.
as well to
I'm just curious,
attach.
why is that? Why was that island
That
created?
goes back a long time. That was Hollandale. When they locked up, there was 3 families there on wrestling. So they petitioned out of Hollandale. When I went to
Oh, I
Breakout
see. Sure.
And
Okay.
it happened.
It did, okay.
Yeah.
No doubt.
And the reason we're holding off on the other schools is because you have to have this done by March 1st in order for it to take effect by July 1st. And we were just,
They felt that there wasn't enough
Yeah,
time
there wasn't enough
to
time
inform
to-
their board. Now, the properties we'll be looking at just briefly, there's an island here that's with Dodgeville, and there's another really small property over here that would have been Dodgeville. And then on the Pecatonica side,
on the
you
Iowa
can see-
Grant
sorry,
side.
Iowa Grant
Yeah.
There's an island here and an island there.
Who's that? Oh, make
that
that
are-
bigger.
Now, in these cases, because, again, we're not giving up any
Yeah.
land, we would be acquiring land, that there was a little bit of, I think, a reservation about, are we trying to do a land grab, and what is this all about? And it's new, we haven't discussed boundaries in 7 years, so why is
Oh, I
this
know.
coming now?
And
So I think it
know
would
that
clear up a lot of
people-
this. To that point, I think Iowa Grant Dodgeville has a lot of things that they need to clean up on their lines, but that's for them to discuss. But we're not trying to get to the point where we have everything north of Mill Creek Road is one and south is the other. We're just simply trying to clean up the islands at this point. And if other things make sense down the road for us to swap equivalent land to make our borders a little bit more cleaner, so be it, but that's not the interest at this time.
All right, we have a motion and a second, we'll do roll call.
Gunlaw,
Yes.
Hay,
Yes.
Stevenson.
Yes.
Basting,
Yes.
Bush,
Yes.
Dolphin,
Yes.
Stefas.
Yes. School board work calendar?
This was revisited again by our policy committee, continues to stay before the board as an annual work plan that could be implemented.
And just so the policy committee didn't really look at this.
True, it was kind of the last minute we forgot to get back in. I think there was discussion about possibly letting the new board take a look at this and make the final determination, which we could then table it to May. We could adopt some of this if you wanted to see some of these reports coming forward. I would just caution trying to throw a student achievement report or math into a night like tonight where we're already tabling things.
Right.
I think the board really needs to be careful and cautious about adopting this policy. I would suggest if they really want to get more achievement reports, then we really need to scale back the other items that come onto the table that may not be as important if we're trying to balance those reports with other competing interests. It could be some very long nights, or you need to build in possibly a second meeting in the month if you're going to have one report, academic report meeting, and then you have one that's a kind of a business meeting. But think about that as you go forward, your recommendations.
I mean, I won't be on the board, but if I was, I would be pushing for more, and we've talked about this, use of technology so that the board and the public can watch videos and things like that that are just informative in advance or whatever, have them attached to the agendas rather than take up the time of the actual meetings when all we really need to be here doing is approving things. That's all.
We will move that to May then, sure, someday in the future, some month in the future. We got 600 series policy we need to approve, it's on the agenda.
The annual operating budget and 631.1 management of tax exempt and tax advantaged obligations.
Was this vetted by your policy committee?
Correct.
I don't know that we actually discussed it, but this is the WASB, this is they have two different policies on 620. One is for kind of district, a unified school district, and the other one is for, so, and we do have a policy 620, and it does seem to be pretty deep. I'm not sure when it's from, maybe 2006 or something.
Do we have a motion to approve policy 600?
I'll make the motion.
Motion by Lisa, a second.
I'll second it. Okay.
Second by Larry Dolphin. Any other discussion?
Just 620.
I think it's just 620, I can't speak to
So your motion to approve 620.
it. Yes.
So only on 620. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. 631.
talks about schools are considered governmental agencies, they have tax exempt status, with tax advantage obligations. I think this just gives you a proper procedure that's set up that would look at, a lot of the stuff will really won't apply. But I would be your compliance officer this way. It just basically says we're monitoring any of those tax exempt opportunities to make sure that where we have the opportunity to not pay tax, that we're not doing that. We're fiscally being responsible, taking the tax off. The tax advantage obligations, I'm not sure we've leveraged any of that yet, but it would have a policy around trying to leverage any obligation that might have a tax advantage to the district being a governmental agency.
No changes from the original format from?
No.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move.
I'll second.
Motion by Julie, second by Lisa. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed, that motion carried. Business services. Teach grant.
The state of Wisconsin implemented what's called a Teach grant. There are some very specific ways that you can use the dollars that are gifted by the state. Some of it has a match, and another component of it has specific parameters around trying to bring broadband and internet and so forth to rural communities. The grant is going to fully fund the Khajiit hotspots, so they're mobile units that we're using, that we have purchased and put in our budget. We are now going to be reimbursed not only for this year, but for the next 2 years going forward through the Teach grant to try to bring in some opportunities. We've looked at some other things that we could write this grant for, but I think that our largest opportunity was something that was before this board a couple of years ago, and it is the ability for us to connect our high school building to our elementary building with what is called fiber, dark fiber. It would allow us then not to have to pay a transport fee from right now. Currently, Charter Communications is the entity that carries our internet connection from the high school to the elementary building. Much like right now, we no longer pay to get our internet into the high school. That is free charge. We only have to pay the internet service provider, WISNET, to provide the internet, but the transport to the building costs us nothing from underneath the highway and Highway 151 to the school. So what this covers is what's called a network accessing. Any network assessment is Teach grant eligible. So we would be assessing how this network might connect these two schools. The grant would cover the cost to do that legwork, scope of work. We thought it was not feasible to spend that amount of money a couple of years ago. It could, it basically has two components. It would probably be in this community, a hybrid of being above ground using some wires that may still have a rental fee but not a transport fee, and it could be some underground trenching and or using existing conduit. But that's part of the scope of this work, is to determine what's the best pathway and the least costly route between the high school and the elementary. Once we figure out that and the scope of the work and the cost, we can figure out the payback period for implementing that project and then see if it is or isn't worth the district actually moving forward. But to get to that point, much like the bid documents that you saw with the roof, you need somebody to put that work together and say this is what it would look like, and then we can try to get some numbers to it.
By approving this, I mean, it seems all very innocuous. Are we setting some giant thing into motion? Because, I mean, the thing is, we were faced with this. I know it was in the summer. I don't think it was last summer. I think it was the summer before that. And we decided not to do it. And I get concerned when I see things we've already said no to, and then they appear again on an agenda.
Understood. I think the only thing that's different is that this is fully reimbursed by a grant.
But
And
this is only getting you
the information.
writing the specs.
Correct.
And then once you do that,
Actually, it writes the specs and generates an RFP, a request for proposal. And that put out could give the board information on what it would actually cost to do the project. And then the board could determine if there's a payback for that.
I would move that we table this. I would like to review the video from the meeting, because I think we had the guy from Livermore. And my recollection was he told us how much, he gave us like a ballpark or something. I can't remember the specifics, so I would like to look at it again, since we already have reviewed this, and now it's here again.
Right.
Can you send us a link to ourselves?
If I remember, he came in over telepresence, so I don't believe that he was here on site, so I'm not sure that that conversation would have been recorded. And if it was, there would only be a summary of the conversation. I'm not sure, because again, I'm pretty sure he used telepresence to come into the meeting, but I don't recall that specifically.
I remember the meeting took place at the elementary school, because the floors were being done here. I think it was
That was
August.
the second part of
Yeah,
that.
I thought he was here once.
Yeah.
Do you remember being here?
Is there a reason from a timeline perspective that tabling it would jeopardize the grant?
No, the grant funds are available this year through, I believe, July. So there's not a pressing sense from that perspective. So if you want to look at the meeting and come back.
And I think even if the video is not available, reach out to Frank and he could give us an idea again of the cost scenarios. And then what we're paying for charter to transport our.
In the bills payable, it's $1,400 for last month.
Right.
But would we still get a bill from charter for something else if we did this, or would that be done?
No, we would eliminate the charter bill much like we did. It used to be double that. It used to be about $2,800 per month. One was to get the money into the building, and then the other one to get it down the road. So that's what I'm looking to eliminate, is those costs going forward. And so this was part of the cost to do the work to figure out how much it would cost. So that was problematic in itself, but if that piece was covered, we could say the project is $20,000 and at $1,400 a month, it would pay back for itself in so many years, that it's that yes or no cost-effective project. But we can't get to that point because we don't know what it would entail, if it's all underground or above ground or both. So that's my interest in actually saving the district long-term dollars by being kind of proactive in removing those fees. So I can do a cost analysis of what we're paying charter annually. This cost, again, would be nothing because it would be grant funded. And then I think to your point, Lisa, if in principle, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't matter what it costs. It doesn't matter if it has a payback or not. You just don't like the idea of connecting these two buildings, even if it might pay back in 5 years.
No, it's not in principle. My recollection was that that the amount we were paying to charter wasn't that much, and then payback would be like in 30 or 40 years. It was too far down. That was my recollection, but I don't remember specifically.
The range of what it could be based on how many poles we would have
Was
to rent.
unknown.
Could be, it could be 20,000, it could be 250,000, depending on how many poles we had to rent. And we didn't want, it was E-rate funded at the time, and we didn't want to spend the 6,000 to find out the number was 250.
Okay.
So now that it's free,
That sounds,
might, I mean, the range was huge because of,
and this will
how
tell us
much
exactly
rent.
how much it costs, and it's free. And you have no other use for that to teach for.
So it's a mile,
We're
about a mile.
not really, not unless we use it for measures that have a match, so we have to spend money to use the money. But this would be 100% covered versus some other things we could do that would only be 50% covered.
Okay.
It's not anything that we're interested in spending
All
money.
right. That sounds big.
All right, we'll move this. Yeah. But I'd like to see a little more information, Jim, just for 1 month.
But this will give you the information that you need to be able to really make the
Well,
decision.
Frank gave us a pretty good idea of what it was going to cost.
No, he said it was like 20,000 to 250,000.
Oh, no, it wasn't in that range.
I think it's a big range. I think
I mean,
that's why
I'm
nobody
thinking
wanted
a
to
couple
do it.
$100,000 minimal.
Minimal, couple hundred?
Wasn't
No, like you said,
But
somewhere.
it may, my low number may be low, but the range was huge. So we couldn't really even estimate payback period because the range for, it could have been 300 to 800.
He said it would be over 100.
that's what I recall, is the range was so big that we'd have no idea, and the high end was high enough that the board didn't feel it was worth $6,000 to find out.
And if it's been a year and a half, it might have been 2 years, maybe there's some new information Frank can give us. Better numbers, better
It
rates.
was July of 2016, right? That's what the document
The
said.
special meeting was August of 2016. I got that video.
You had the video.
I got the videos.
July 25th, 16th, this is.
And if it doesn't hurt nothing, table it for a month. But if there's a motion, I would,
But no second.
is there a second to Jeff's motion?
I'll second it.
The motion was to approve this? Sorry, okay.
I didn't hear that.
We're approving this here, the price, right?
Okay. All right, got a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Just doing some quick math, we're spending roughly about $16,800 a year to transport internet from this building to the other building.
You have that much?
Yeah, now we do get some E-rate funding from that, so it's a discounted rate, but that's what the all-in cost is. And I think to the point that it costs us nothing to figure out, is it 20 or is it 250 or is it 100? And then multiply or divide that by the 16,000 we're spending, gives you I think just information. And then I think it guides the board in a way that I think it'll become clear whether it makes sense or not, but I just don't know, don't know.
And I understand, but I hate to spend $11,000 if the board's not going to go down the path. If the information comes back, even the preliminary information we already have, it's like money wasted. Maybe we can go to another school to help in a better way.
Do you think, you think the board would go for 250,000?
Well, I have no idea.
If it came back then, I'm asking.
16,000, I doubt it. Now with elementary school and the planning committee and all that work they've done.
I wouldn't, if it come back that high, but I won't be here, so. Now, you're saying you don't think we should spend that money now?
I'd like to get a little more information on the payback and the estimated cost, the different scenarios.
You said how much, Luke, now about?
About 16,800 a year.
Yeah. And if we're not pressed
Pretty
up.
slow?
That's high-speed internet from here to there, but we're on what's
Quick.
called lit fiber, so we're paying a premium to transport it over.
So we got a motion and a second. We'll do a roll call.
Basting,
Yes.
Bush,
Yes.
Dolphin,
Yes.
Gunlaw,
Yes.
Hay,
Abstain.
Stevenson,
Yes.
Stefas.
No. Thank you. Credit cards?
Should we have some more, could have we spent that money somewhere else though? Or does it have to go for this?
Lisa asked that.
Yeah, there's really nothing.
Lisa had asked.
Yeah.
I reviewed it and
Is that-
there really isn't anything. We would have had to pay a match if we wanted to use it for something else like access points. We would have had to pay 50% of the cost of that. It just didn't make sense to spend money to get money. So this is one of the few areas where it could be 100% reimbursed.
Credit card statement? Motion to approve?
I'll move.
Motion by Julie, do you have a second? Any questions?
Yep.
Page 7, do you have I got, mine says page 7 because I printed it out, so I don't know what yours is.
You're on bills payable.
Yeah.
What is it, the credit card?
Oh, the credit card, sorry. It's late, I'm sorry.
Any questions on the credit card?
No.
Anybody? Roll call? Ian?
Stevenson,
Yes.
Basting,
Yes.
Bush,
Yes.
Dolphin,
Yes.
Gunlaw,
Yes.
Hay,
Abstain.
Stefas.
Yes. Bills payable, do we have a motion to approve?
I got two questions on that. Page 6. Music for the high school is young. What does that consist of?
Page 6, music for the high school gym. I know we had some repairs on the sound system, lifeline, audio, video technology, miscellaneous for high school gym, repairing the audio system.
Where was that?
Miscellaneous,
Maddie, what?
Page 6.
about 4 down.
Mike for the
It's
school
actually a
gym.
microphone.
Yeah.
I have a question. There's the $4,000 to the Oberhauser.
Yeah, that was my question too.
Mine
And I
too,
thought-
but that's more than 1 month, I think.
But didn't we just pay more?
I asked that question to Marcia too. That was the second installment of the full payment. So half was paid last year in 2017, the other half in 2018.
So there won't be another one now till like
That's-
July?
Next year.
18, 19, yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
Is there a contract on that? Because I've never seen that.
Yeah, it is.
So that was the second of
So
two
it's-
payments.
So is that spelled out in the contract, Lou?
Mhm.
Well, if I would've seen the contract, I would've known that.
I think it's in a passport packet, but I can certainly send it your way.
I don't think,
We wouldn't typically see the contracts necessarily, would we?
If we asked to see them.
Oh, yeah, it's good.
Yes, that's true.
Other questions on the bills payable?
It's just a boilerplate, very small.
Okay.
What is the
You said it was a boilerplate.
Sorry.
I know, I've heard that before too.
On page 8, Luke, professional services for, something
Two last
Brady.
year.
Quarles and Brady?
Thank you.
they're law firm.
They were our bond counsel. And, yeah, so when we borrowed the bonds for the roofing project and the stadium project, they oversaw that process to make sure that we were within DPI rule, didn't exceed the $1 million in aggregate spending, and was helpful and creative to put the resolutions together and make sure that everything was solid legally for public notices and so forth.
We have them on a retainer, or do they just charge us when we use them?
Just charge them when we use them. Yeah, we don't do much bonding, so we try to just use them sparingly.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
University of Wisconsin Platteville for class schedule, is that where we pay for him to take college courses, I assume?
Yeah, you know that for sure. I have to look at the
UW Platteville lit class, I'm imagining.
Oh, that's
I
for
think
our,
that's his 3.
What
what
case
page
is
are
that?
you referencing?
It's Hawkins 3.
Oh, of
Page
course.
10 and 11.
Yeah. Class to the youth options next year in college.
Jake, is that more questions?
No, I think that's it.
I have a question. Page 9, the signs to go.
Yeah. That would be, the numbers above the emergency doors, my guess. It's a new vendor. So I'm pretty sure that's what that was that Roger ordered up,
What?
the signs to go.
You mean the numbers we've been waiting since forever, there's the numbers we're talking about?
They're all up.
That's what they cost?
I don't know that that's,
So yeah, flat acrylic numbers 1 through 9.
that's just for here.
Those are the
that
door
was-
numbers.
Double-sided tape, $24 per, and then you've got 2 of them, we got one on the inside, one on the outside, so that's doubled. So you got $216 for 1 through 9 at 25 per, and then you've got that doubled $216 for $432 for the inside and outside.
And then page 8, flexible seating. There's all in there. And soft seating.
School specialties, soft seating, flexible seating from school outfitters. I know that's at the elementary. I thought it might have been Lithka Bennett's room, but that may not be right. So I'll have to just double check, see if it's attached to a certain.
That's okay.
There's also some retrofitting at the high school office area.
PO was 240, it's like what I do.
Got that right here, I just don't know if it's got any. So this is Judy Benish's room.
This is Spanish.
Yeah, Judy Benish's room.
This chairs.
Chairs, just little height tables and so forth.
Okay. Everybody get their questions answered? On the UW Bible one, did you get an answer to that? Was that the youth option?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's for Hawkins
We pre-approved it.
You thought?
Youth option. So I just have one question. Are there any more lawyers' fees on here?
Looking for Godfrey Kahn, that would be our options. Charter, looking for Alina Thompson, that would be for special education. I don't see that in here. See if it's under first name. Looking under Wadsby for Bob Butler. I do not see, Wadsby, so I do not see at first glance any attorney fees in this bills payable.
So we haven't been billed yet for special ed lawyers?
No, we have not received, I thought we received a partial invoice, but that might have been in last bills payable. We have not received the final invoice.
All right, roll call.
Did we have a motion to approve that?
We
I'll
did.
make a motion to, was there one? I'll make a
No.
motion.
Okay.
We have a motion. Lisa?
That one.
Moved and Larry, a second.
Gary? Hay.
Yes.
Stevenson. Abstain. Basting.
Abstain.
Bush.
Yes.
Dolphin.
Yes.
Brunmont.
Yes.
Stefas.
Yes. Motion carried. Employee services.
Employee services, we've received 2 resignations. First of all, the district recommends approval of Tim Bauman. He's our orientation mobility specialist. He's a full-time staff member. He's asked for his resignation to be effective after the conclusion of this 2017-18 school year. The district recommends approval of Tim's resignation.
Motion by Julie, do we have a second? Second by Lisa. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
We have before us the resignation of Dixie Dempsey, Director of Pupil Services and School Psychologist. She's also a full-time position that would commence with the conclusion of the 2017-18 school year. The district recommends approval of the resignation.
Motion.
I'll
Motion by Lisa, second by Larry. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. That concludes my agenda. Anything
Next regular board meeting scheduled for Monday, March 12th, 6:30 p.m. I'd like to schedule time to just review policy with rescheduled meeting with Lisa and Julie that we had scheduled but weren't able to carry on because of my schedule. And I know there's an operations committee meeting that sounds like it is pending, so we want to get a date for that as well.
We need 24 hours notice for that?
For posting purposes, we try to do 48, but 24 is state statute.
Is it possible in closed session to address the Sullivan issue? Okay, from the board?
So, is it possible?
Yeah. It wasn't on the agenda. It was discussed during this meeting.
It's up to the board.
I think we should. I mean, you can update us on closed session things anytime. And so I think.
Just briefly, I'd
Yeah,
like to get a
I
little
think we're kind of a bit of it, right, just a little bit.
So we will go into closed session.
And get back to it.
So we're motioning to go.
I'll move.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion by Julie, second by Kelly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We will go into closed session after a short break.